Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was the son of Yamraj, the god of death and hell. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's dive into the story. Night fell upon the Hidden Leaf village like a silent promise of secrets untold. Lanterns glowed in narrow alleys, casting trembling shapes on the worn-out walls. It was past curfew for most children, but Naruto Uzumaki wandered freely, unconcerned by the occasional suspicious glare thrown his way. He wore an orange hoodie zipped halfway, bright color in the gloom, and he walked with a peculiar sense of calm, an aura that made even the shadows shrink away from him. He didn't understand why, exactly, but deep inside he felt it. Some primal power, waiting to be unleashed. He paused at the edge of the village, near a small wooden post marking the boundary between Konoha and the vast forest beyond. Breathing in the crisp air, he shut his eyes. A strange tingle crawled across his skin, as if a presence loomed just beyond sight. "Stop lurking," he muttered. No response came. Still, he felt watched. The wind rustled the canopy, the leaves whispered among themselves, but no one revealed themselves. Typical, he thought. He had felt these eerie eyes on him before, drifting in and out of his consciousness since he was old enough to form proper memories. He shrugged it off and returned home. Home was a modest apartment, walls scuffed with age. Its solitude never bothered him. He preferred the hush of night over the bustle of daytime, anyway. Sleep proved a tentative friend, as his dreams were anything but normal. The moment he closed his eyes, darkness dragged him into another realm entirely. The first thing he felt was cold. A bone-deep chill. There was no light, no sound. He floated in endless midnight, as though caught in the void between life and death. Then a voice thundered in the abyss. Deep, resonant, more powerful than anything he could imagine. "You are my son." The words slammed into him. He saw a fleeting image. A towering figure robed in shadows, crowned by curling smoke that pulsed with red embers. This entity's eyes were molten gold, penetrating and ancient. Naruto attempted to speak, but no words came. He heard thousands of wailing souls echo in the blackness. Fear and awe flooded him. Then a savage pull at his chest jerked him awake, back into his cramped apartment, gasping for air. Beads of sweat trickled down his temple. He clutched his sheets, scanning the room for any sign of the monstrous being. Nothing was there save his own panting breath and the pale moonlight sneaking through the curtains. The alarm clock blinked 3:14 a.m. He tried to calm the frantic pounding of his heart. Sleep wouldn't welcome him again that night. At sunrise, he trudged to the academy for another day of lessons. The usual stares followed him, even from teachers. There was something disconcerting about a kid who seemed so unapproachable. He wasn't loud or obnoxious, contrary to what some rumored. He just kept to himself. From a distance, other students whispered that he exuded a sense of dread, as if standing too close to him brought the risk of misfortune. At times he joked that he might be cursed. As he stepped into class, he gave a light nod to Hinata Hyuga, who ducked her head, blushing faintly. She was the only one who never seemed frightened. Others, like Kiba, Sasuke, and even Shikamaru, kept their distance. Lessons dragged on. Ninja fundamentals, weapon handlings, the shinobi code. Naruto excelled at the physical aspects, but he feigned only average skill. He discovered early on that drawing attention could lead to complicated questions. Iruka-sensei taught them about chakra control in the last hour, an overview of the tree climbing exercise. As the lecture ended, Naruto gazed at the class. His eyes fell on Tenten, a kunoichi from another class who sometimes visited to observe. She had come to see Iruka about some training forms, but paused, noticing him. A flicker of curiosity passed over her features. He gave her a polite half-smile, and she blinked, looking away. Her reaction wasn't fear, more attention that suggested she sensed something unusual. He was used to that, so he shrugged it off. At midday, Naruto slipped away to a quiet corner behind the academy. A few training logs stood in a row, battered from years of practice. He crouched, pressing his palm to the ground, letting chakra stream into the soil. The slight hum under his fingertips felt comforting, like warm water coursing through his veins. But beneath that wholesome energy lurked a second current, colder, heavier, older than any life force should be. Slowly, he lifted his hand. A faint swirl of blackish smoke, barely visible in daylight, coiled around his wrist and then vanished. He closed his eyes and recalled the dream. Those glowing golden eyes, the resounding voice that called him, son. Fear pricked at his mind. If that was truly some spirit or entity, what did it want with him? He pulled back from that question when he heard a footstep. He turned to see Hinata standing a few yards away, her fingers twisting together nervously. She apologized for startling him, voice almost a whisper, asked if he was okay. She'd noticed he'd looked tired in class. For a split second, he considered confiding in her about the nightmares and the strange voice. But what would he say? That in his dreams, an otherworldly being claimed to be his father? She'd think he was insane. So he just smiled and reassured her. Hinata nodded, relief on her face, but something in her eyes said she sensed more. Later that day, with classes wrapped up, Naruto left the academy. He kept to less crowded streets on his walk home. Something about the lingering stares in the market made him uneasy. Even a few ninjas from the village watch gave him sideways glances. He suspected they felt that same oppressive aura he couldn't completely hide. He was almost at his apartment when he noticed an unfamiliar figure in a dark robe standing across the way, near an abandoned house. The robe was tattered at the edges, like it had been dragged through dust and gravel. The figure stood unnaturally still. A chill rippled along Naruto's spine. He blinked, and in that moment, the figure was gone, replaced by empty air and a drifting autumn leaf. He darted forward, scanning the nook between buildings, but it was deserted. No footprints, no sign that anyone had stood there. Still, an uneasy sense of being watched remained. That night brought no respite. Sleep claimed him for only a few hours, and then the dream returned. This time, he was in a subterranean hall lit by sputtering torches. The walls were carved from black stone, inscribed with screaming faces, a mosaic of agony. Wind howled through the corridor, carrying the stench of decay. He moved forward, unsure of his own steps, drawn by a presence at the far end of the hall. There, enthroned on a dais of bleached bone, sat the same robed figure he'd glimpsed in the village, but magnified 1,000-fold in size and majesty. Its hood was thrown back, revealing a visage both human and not. Its skin was ashen, eyes molten gold, but the shape of its jaw, the cut of its cheekbones, something reminiscent of Naruto's own reflection. He was sure of it. Naruto. The voice was a choir of the dead. Are you prepared to learn what you truly are? He tried to speak, but a wave of terror froze him. The figure rose from the throne, looming tall. Behind it, thousands of spirits clawed at the stone floor, wailing, begging for mercy. The figure extended a skeletal hand, pointing toward him. A swirl of black flames erupted around Naruto's feet, and the dream ended abruptly, spitting him back into his bed. This time, the surge of energy didn't vanish. It crackled around him, faint like static. He panted, raking fingers through his hair. He could still hear those tortured souls in his head. Summer, though, was a strange sense of recognition. Whoever that being was, it felt, intimately linked to him. Morning arrived, golden light drenching Konoha in a deceptive warmth. Naruto's exhaustion must have been obvious, because Iruka asked him if everything was all right. He made up an excuse about not sleeping well and tried to stay focused. Classes continued, but no matter how hard he tried, his thoughts drifted back to the subterranean hall and that robed entity's words. At lunch, he overheard a group of students whispering about him, speculating whether he was part demon or maybe cursed by some forgotten jutsu. Usually, he ignored such chatter, but something about it stung today, probably because he feared there might be a grain of truth hidden in their gossip. Sasuke Uchiha, brooding at a window, glanced at Naruto with mild curiosity. Perhaps he, too, felt the strange aura. Naruto ignored the stare and walked out of the classroom to get some air. He found a quiet spot in the training field behind the academy, where a single blossoming tree stood watch. He had barely settled under its branches before Ino Yamanaka approached. She often wore a confident smirk, but her expression now was guarded, uncertain. She asked, somewhat boldly, "Why do you always keep to yourself? You act so off. Like you're carrying some huge burden." Her voice wasn't mocking, more concerned than Naruto expected. Ino wasn't known for subtlety, but she had a knack for sensing shifts in people's emotions. Naruto's immediate response was a small shrug. He muttered something vague about personal things, but Ino didn't press. She just studied him for a moment, then gave a short nod as if she'd confirmed a suspicion, and left. Maybe she decided he needed space. Afternoon training commenced, Iruka assigning them to practice basic ninjutsu. Naruto channeled his chakra, forming a perfect clone on his first attempt. It was too perfect. A hush fell over the group. Even Sasuke, who prided himself on his skill, raised an eyebrow. Naruto cursed himself silently. He hadn't meant to show off. He dispelled the clone with a wave of his hand, forcibly adding a clumsy flourish to make it look less natural. Iruka coughed to break the awkward silence and moved on to the next student. Whispers resumed, but Naruto pretended not to hear. At dusk, the sky bled orange and purple over the Hokage monument. Naruto sat atop the academy roof, legs dangling over the edge, reflecting on the day. He could see people returning to their homes, lights flickering in windows. The daily hum of Konoha had never felt so distant. A flutter of movement to his right caught his eye. A crow perched on a railing, gazing at him with sharp, black eyes. The crow cawed once and then took off, circling overhead. Oddly, it didn't leave, it almost seemed to beckon him. Intrigued, Naruto hopped down from the roof and followed the crow's path through winding alleys, deeper into a section of the village where few ventured after dark. Eventually, he found himself near a dilapidated shrine, one that looked long abandoned. The crow landed on the shrine's entrance. With a final caw, it vanished into the darkness inside. Naruto hesitated. Something about the place felt otherworldly, like crossing its threshold might seal his fate. Still, curiosity and a pull from deep within pushed him forward. The interior was lit only by moonlight streaming through cracks in the ceiling. Tattered banners hung from crumbling walls, depicting symbols Naruto didn't recognize. Swirling patterns, some shapes resembling skulls or twisted beasts. He stepped carefully, mindful of the broken floorboards. At the far end of the shrine, he caught sight of an altar. A single candle burned there with a flickering violet flame, feeding no obvious smoke. He approached, heart hammering. The candle flame bent toward him, as if reacting to his presence. Suddenly, the robed figure materialized by the altar. The same figure he'd seen outside his apartment and in his dream, though it was much smaller now, human size. Features obscured by the hood, yet golden eyes gleamed from within. Naruto tensed, every instinct screaming at him to be ready for battle, but the figure made no hostile move. Instead, it spoke in a low voice that resonated through the silent shrine. Naruto Uzumaki. Son of Yamraj. We've been waiting for you. He nearly stepped back, but the gravitational pull of that voice was immense. Thoughts collided in his mind. Yamraj, the being from his nightmares, was real? The robed figure continued. You sense it, don't you? The realm beyond life. The domain where souls are weighed and judged. Lightning shot through Naruto's nerves. He demanded to know what was happening. Why he was being haunted. The figure answered, because you carry the blood of the god of death and hell. Because in you lies the power to bring total destruction or salvation. He has watched you since the day you were born. And soon, you will meet him face to face. Naruto's breath caught in his throat. The figure's words simultaneously answered and raised a dozen new questions. God of death? Hell? He opened his mouth to protest that it all sounded impossible. But a swirl of black mist encircled the robed figure, dissolving it piece by piece. The voice persisted, echoing off the shrine's walls. Heed the call, Naruto. The time will come when your will shapes fate itself. Remember, you are the heir of death. With that, the figure vanished completely, leaving no trace except the guttering violet flame on the altar. A storm of conflicting emotions raged inside Naruto. Fear, fascination, disbelief, anger that he'd been left in the dark about his parentage all these years. The candle's flame flickered violently, as if sharing his turmoil, and then snuffed out in a wisp of purple smoke. He stumbled out of the shrine, adrenaline pumping, nearly tripping over broken steps. Outside, the crow was gone. The street lamp flickered overhead, sending shadows dancing across the dirt path. For a moment, he thought of running straight to the Hokage or to Iruka, demanding answers. But some instinct told him they wouldn't know anything, or worse, they might try to lock him away out of fear. He remembered the stares of the villagers, how they recoiled from his aura. If they learned he was supposedly the son of the god of death, that would only confirm every suspicion they already had. Conflicted, he forced himself to calm down. The robed figure had mentioned meeting him face to face. His father. The mention of father tugged at his heart. He'd grown up believing he was alone, an orphan. Now, the possibility that his father might be some divine, terrifying presence was more overwhelming than the notion of being orphaned in the first place. And yet, he also felt a surge of relief, as though some piece of him that had always been missing was finally stepping into the light. When he got back to his apartment, it felt smaller than ever. He paced the floor, anxiety gnawing at his mind. Eventually, fatigue overcame him, and he sank into bed, letting the darkness carry him away. Sure enough, the dream followed, just as vivid, but this time the throne room was empty. No figure, no wailing souls. The black stone walls flickered with ephemeral torches, an almost expectant hush enveloping everything. Naruto stepped forward, calling out to the emptiness, "Are you there?" Only echoes answered. He felt goosebumps rise. Something coiled around his foot. A shape of swirling smoke, as though testing him, and then it receded. He woke with the dawn, uncertain, unsettled. With no classes that day, an academy break, he decided to roam around the village to distract himself. But from the moment he set foot outside, he felt eyes on him again. He spun, expecting to see the robed figure, but instead found a small squad of shinobi watching him warily. Likely Anbu or a covert team under Danzo's command. He pretended not to notice and hurried on. The entire time, though, that intangible presence weighed on K. Eventually, he escaped into the forest just beyond Konoha's walls, following a narrow, winding path that led to a secluded clearing by a stream. This was a place he came to think, away from judging stares. He perched on a large, flat stone at the water's edge and stared at his reflection. For a heartbeat, his eyes flickered with a dark glow, so brief he wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. Then he sighed and closed his eyes, trying to empty his mind. The memory of the robed figure's voice kept surfacing. "You carry the blood of the god of death and hell." Naruto opened his eyes again, exhaling shakily. His hands fisted. If all this was true, did that mean he was a threat to everyone he cared about? Or did it mean he was destined for some grand purpose? He had no answers, only more questions. Feeling a jolt of frustration, he grabbed a pebble, threw it into the stream, watched the ripples spread. The next few hours passed in tense quiet. Clouds gathered overhead, gray and heavy with promise of rain. He steeled himself, deciding he would not let fear paralyze him. If this power was truly in his blood, he'd learn to control it, harness it, use it to protect the village, if need be. The idea that something so ominous could be used for good gave him a glimmer of hope. Late in the afternoon, as he made his way back, droplets of rain began to fall. He took a shortcut through the training grounds near the back of the academy. To his surprise, he spotted Tenten practicing with a set of metal targets. Her precision with throwing weapons was admirable, each kunai landing close to the bullseye. She glanced over and acknowledged him with a polite nod. He watched for a few moments, the rain matting his hair. She hesitated, asked if he wanted to try. Wordlessly, he stepped forward, took a kunai from the training pouch, and concentrated. Normally, chakra was enough to guide a kunai with good accuracy. But now, he felt that darker energy stirring in his core. It wrapped around his senses, sharpening them. He blinked, took aim, and released. The kunai shot across the field, piercing the bullseye dead center. Tenten's eyes widened a fraction. She commented that his technique was flawless. He smiled faintly and shrugged, making a self-deprecating remark about luck. Inside, however, he felt that cold whisper again, that presence that always hovered at the edge of his consciousness. Night fell quickly with the storm clouds overhead, so Tenten left, and Naruto found himself alone in the drizzle. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The dark shape of the forest loomed, a silhouette against streaks of lightning. Without warning, a swirl of wind kicked up dust behind him. He spun around, instantly on guard. A second robed figure emerged, smaller than the first, face shrouded in a deep hood. No eyes were visible. Rain pelted the figure, but it showed no reaction. Naruto's heartbeat thundered as he stepped back, fists ready. But the figure raised one hand in what looked like a gesture of peace. When it spoke, its voice was as hollow as an empty crypt. "Your father calls to you. He grows impatient." Fear flared, but Naruto steadied himself. "What does he want from me?" "To awaken what you truly are," the figure whispered, voice nearly drowned by the pounding rain. "Prepare yourself, child of Yamraj, for when the gate opens, your power will flood the mortal realm. Nothing will ever be the same. Naruto's resolve hardened. He might be only a student at the academy, but he had already tasted some of that hidden might. The question was whether he could control it. He bared his teeth and growled, "Then let him come to me, and I'll show him I'm more than just some puppet for his schemes." The figure's hood dipped slightly, almost like a nod. "The day of reckoning draws near," it intoned. Then a flash of lightning lit the field, revealing for a split second a skull-like visage beneath that hood. Naruto recoiled in shock, and in that moment, the figure vanished, leaving only swirling raindrops. Chest heaving, Naruto tried to make sense of the brief encounter. All doubts about his father being some imaginary ghost were gone. This was real, and it was bigger than him, bigger than Konoha. A sense of destiny pressed on his shoulders. He glanced at his hands, half expecting black smoke to coil from his fingertips. It didn't, but he knew that the power, whatever it was, rested beneath the surface, waiting for his command. Lightning flashed again, and thunder rattled the sky. Naruto lifted his gaze, letting the rain drench him. He thought of the lonely nights in the orphanage, the stares of the villagers, the nightmares that never left him. Somehow, it all made sense now. He was different for a reason. The fear people felt around him, maybe it was their instincts warning them of the dark presence coiled inside. Shoulders squared, he slowly returned to his apartment, each lightning strike revealing flickers of that robed figure's warning in his mind. He wondered what the future held. A father who ruled hell itself, and inherited dominion over life and death. Despite the dread that trailed his every step, an odd pulse of excitement lit his eyes. He wasn't just some cursed child. He had a heritage, a path to walk, a destiny to carve out. If he had to stand at the gates of hell itself to claim the truth, so be it. His last thought before drifting into a restless sleep was of Yamraj's throne room. He pictured himself stepping into that endless black hall, unafraid, demanding answers from the towering god of death. The image both terrified and exhilarated him. Thunder boomed outside, a symphony to match the storm within his soul. And somewhere, beyond mortal perception, molten gold eyes watched with pleased anticipation. Morning light crept over Konoha, painting the village in gentle gold. Naruto stirred in his small apartment, haunted by half-remembered dreams. Robed figures, echoes of an otherworldly throne, a name repeated in the hollow of his skull. Yamraj. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, willing the memories to fade. No success. The day stretched ahead like a long road he wasn't sure how to travel. He left early, hoping the crisp air would clear his thoughts, but the presence trailing him since last night felt stronger. Sometimes he thought he caught a glimpse, an Anbu mask flashing around the corner, or a dark silhouette on a distant rooftop. He chose to ignore it. If they wanted to spy on him, fine. Let them see the kid who refused to bow to fear. By the time he reached the academy's courtyard, the usual crowd of students was milling about. The sight of their chatter and mundane routines should have been comforting, a shield from the supernatural weight on his shoulders. Yet he could sense the subtle shift in the air when he arrived. Conversations dipped in volume. Eyes flicked toward him. A few classmates unconsciously backed away. He forced a confident grin, striding forward with shoulders squared. "Morning, Naruto." Hinata approached shyly, hands clasped just above her waist. She looked up at him with genuine concern. A slight tremble wavered in her tone. I didn't see you after class yesterday, are you okay?" He tried to keep his voice casual. "Just needed some space. But I'm fine." Her relief was palpable, as though she believed him because she wanted to, not because his words were convincing. Ino strolled past, flipping her ponytail, casting him a curious glance. He had a hunch she was still dissecting their brief talk under the tree the day before, that she might press him again for answers. But she only tossed him a half smirk and joined her friends. His gaze swept the courtyard. Tenten was there too, exchanging training tips with Lee. When she caught him watching, she gave a subtle nod, an echo of the weapons practice they'd shared in the rain. He nodded back, grateful for the small anchor of familiarity. Soon, the academy's doors opened, and students filed inside. Naruto found his seat, bracing for another day of pretending to be ordinary. Ion, rehashing the basic principles of transformation jutsu. Naruto followed along, but half his mind strayed to that midnight shrine. The robed messenger. Son of Yamraj. The words rang with heavy finality. Mid-morning arrived with a practical session in the training arena behind the school. The exercise seemed straightforward. Leap through a course of wooden poles, land precise kicks and punches on suspended targets, then finish with a clone jutsu. Sasuke breezed through first, nimble as ever. Sakura cheered him on, but the Uchiha only had eyes for one thing: his own reflection of skill. Next, Kiba went, yapping about how he and Akamaru could do better. Then it was Naruto's turn. He jumped onto the first pole, feeling each wooden surface under his sandals. Chakra thrummed in his veins, but so did something else. That darker current, the presence swirling from deep within. He inhaled, focusing purely on the moves. One leap. He soared easily to the second pole. Another hop, and he was across. He delivered a spinning kick that shattered the target, startling everyone. The wooden plank snapped in half with a resounding crack. Naruto winced internally. He'd used too much force. He quickly veiled it by stumbling on the landing, feigning a minor misstep. Still, their stares weighed on him. Iruka gave a half frown, but said nothing. Some students clapped politely, while others exchanged anxious glances. Sasuke's eyes narrowed in scrutiny. Sakura blinked in surprise. Hinata's cheeks flushed with a mix of admiration and worry. Next came the clone jutsu. Naruto conjured a single shadow clone, perfect in detail, only to dispel it almost immediately, pretending it wasn't intentional. He could practically feel the tension in the air. People knew he was holding back. He forced a casual laugh, scratching the back of his head. Guess I need more practice. They moved on to other drills, and he kept a low profile, letting others take the spotlight. When the session ended, he slipped away before anyone could corner him with questions. Yet he felt multiple sets of eyes on his back. Sasuke's sharp glare, Ino's curious stare, even Tenten's studious gaze. Each recognized a deeper strength beneath his mask of indifference. Afternoon classes dragged, and just before the final bell, a teacher Naruto had never interacted with closely, one named Moro, took over from Iruka. Moro was tall, with sunken eyes and an unsettling calm about him. His instructions for a teamwork exercise were clipped. Nothing about him overtly screamed danger, but Naruto noticed the subtle tension in his posture, as though the man were constantly assessing every student in the room. Worse, whenever Naruto chanced a glance, Moro's gaze was already there, piercing and relentless. Group up into pairs for the exercise, Moro instructed. Demonstrate at least one collaborative jutsu. The class sprang into motion. Naruto found himself beside Hinata. By design or coincidence, he wasn't sure. They formed a workable plan for a simple combination of Byakugan scouting and Naruto's clone feint. Halfway through, though, Naruto felt Moro's stare intensify. He fumbled slightly with the hand signs, sending a trickle of dread through his nerves. Was Moro onto him? Did he know something about Naruto's lineage? Hinata apologized softly for a perceived mistake on her end, but Naruto waved it off and tried to regain focus. When they finished, Moro's face remained unreadable. He only nodded, jotting something down in a small notebook. The session ended, and the class was dismissed. While most students bolted for the door, Naruto lingered in the hall, telling himself he was just looking for his misplaced notebook. In truth, he wanted to see if Moro did anything suspicious. He peered through the crack of the door and saw the teacher standing beside the desk, flipping through papers with methodical precision. Then, Moro glanced at a small photograph pinned on the wall. A group shot from a decade before, and walked out with no further sign of interest. Naruto exhaled. Maybe he was imagining things. Outside, he bumped into Ino. She teased him about snooping around, but her tone held no malice. "What's up with you?" she asked, crossing her arms, eyes narrowing. "You seem edgy." He debated deflection, but something about her gaze, bright with curiosity rather than judgment, made him relent a bit. "Just some weird dreams. Don't worry, I'll deal with it." Her lips quirked in a smirk. "You know, if you ever want to talk, I'm a good listener. Even though I might not look like it." A little warmth spread through his chest. He gave a nod of thanks, and she beamed, tossing her hair. Then she headed off, probably to meet Shikamaru and Choji. Naruto felt an odd sense of comfort. Between Hinata's gentle worry, Ino's open curiosity, and Tenten's calm respect during training, he realized he wasn't as alone as he once assumed. That thought gave him a fleeting sense of normalcy, until the sky dimmed and the shadows around him lengthened. He spent the late afternoon in one of the academy's empty practice yards, throwing kunai at battered targets. He let the repetitive motion soothe him. The clang of steel against wood helped him ignore the hush of wind that sometimes carried a voice only he could hear. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice Sasuke approaching until the Uchiha's reflection appeared on a battered target, shiny black hair framing a scrutinizing expression. "Your aim's gotten better," Sasuke remarked. It wasn't praise so much as observation. "You've been hiding it, but it's obvious now." Naruto shrugged, retrieving a kunai from the stump. "You're paranoid." Sasuke scoffed. "I might be, but I'm also not blind. Something's going on with you." He paused, lips thinning. "I have my own reasons for getting stronger. Whatever power you're playing with, if it threatens my goals, I won't hesitate to crush you." Naruto's annoyance flared. The old him might have snapped back with a retort, but this new, darker presence thrumming under his skin reacted differently. For a split second, a chill ran through the practice yard, like a wave of malice that set the hairs on Sasuke's neck on end. But Naruto clenched his jaw, holding it back, and turned away. "Don't worry. My power's none of your concern, unless you make it so." Sasuke stepped closer, eyes narrowed, but then Tenten's voice broke the tension. "Naruto, Iruka-sensei said you can lock up after you're done." She glanced between them, sensing the static charge in the air. "Am I interrupting something?" Sasuke exhaled sharply and brushed past her without a word, his footsteps receding across the dirt. Tenten set down a small chest of training tools and arched a brow at Naruto. "What was that about?" He forced a short laugh. "Nothing. Just Uchiha things." She didn't press, instead opening the chest to organize the weapons inside. He helped her in silence, a comfortable hush settling. Occasionally, she snuck a look at him, as if guessing he had a lot more to say. Maybe she was right, but he was too tangled in questions to share them just yet. Night arrived, and again Naruto found himself in his cramped apartment, reluctant to sleep. But sleep claimed him anyway, dragging him into an endless corridor of black stone. This time, the torches flickered green, casting sickly light on carved faces screaming silently from the walls. He walked, each step echoing ominously. At the corridor's end waited a set of gigantic doors etched with bizarre symbols, demons, skulls, swirling flames. He reached out, trembling, to push them open. A deafening roar forced him awake. Heart pounding, he realized it came from outside in the real world. He leapt to his window and stared into the night. Over the rooftops, a flicker of orange light danced, and screams echoed through the streets. Something was rampaging near the village outskirts. Without a second thought, he threw on a jacket and rushed out, instinct as no ordinary threat. By the time he arrived at the scene, a massive boar-like creature, grotesquely mutated, thrashing with unnatural chakra, had already torn through a portion of Konoha's perimeter. A squad of Chunin struggled to contain it, but their jutsu only made it angrier. Civilians fled, and a group of onlookers crowded behind a barricade, each face lined with panic. Naruto wove through the stunned crowd. He locked eyes with the monstrous boar. Its tusks dripped with saliva, and its eyes glowed red, as though possessed. He sensed the vile energy pulsing from it, felt a tingle in his bloodstream respond. The boar charged at a Chunin who was reloading a crossbow, aiming to gore him. The man was too slow to dodge. Without thinking, Naruto shouted and darted forward. The boar turned its gaze on him, bloodlust swirling in the night. A savage wave of chakra built in Naruto's chest, overshadowing everything else. People around him seemed to move in slow motion. He felt a sudden, undeniable surge of cold power rise from his core, like the breath of a graveyard wind. His vision narrowed to the boar's savage eyes, and a single command echoed in his mind: "Die." It happened in an instant. The boar froze mid-charge, as though an invisible hand had seized its heart. Its eyes went wide, reflecting terror for the briefest second. Then it collapsed, skidding across the ground, body limp. No visible wound, no final cry. Just abrupt, eerie stillness. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some shinobi readied weapons, confused. Others simply stared at Naruto. He stood there, breath uneven, that icy aura still dancing across his skin. The silence broke when the Chunin scrambled forward to examine the boar. One prodded it carefully, confirming the obvious: it was dead. People began murmuring. How did he do that? Did he kill it with a single look? What kind of jutsu is that? Naruto's gut twisted. He glanced at his hands, half expecting them to be stained with black smoke. When no one else dared approach, he knelt beside the creature. Its eyes were blank, no sign of life. He felt no remorse for saving people, but the method, it shook him. Even more unsettling was how easy it had been. No drawn-out conflict, no flashy jutsu. Just a thought. All around, shinobi arrived, some from the Hyuga clan, a pair from the Yamanaka. A hush fell as they recognized Naruto at the center of the chaos. Whispers escalated. He overheard fragments. He killed it instantly, not even a scratch, must be some forbidden jutsu. Then he spotted Moro, the suspicious teacher from earlier, standing at the edge of the crowd. Their eyes met. Moro's expression was cold, calculating, as if he'd just witnessed proof of something he'd long suspected. Before Naruto could move, the teacher disappeared in a blur of motion, likely reporting to higher-ups. Naruto's breath caught, heart-hammering. Now they knew. Or at least, they'd have enough reason to ask questions. A couple of Chunin thanked him for stopping the rampage, but their eyes shone with fear. He nodded absently and drifted away. No one tried to stop him. Some parted like he was toxic. Others stared with a new kind of respect marred by dread. The deeper he moved into the streets, the more the crowd melted into darkness, leaving him alone under flickering lamps. He turned a corner and nearly collided with Tenten and Ino. They'd run there together upon hearing the alarm. Tenten's eyes took in the dead boar, then flicked to Naruto. Ino covered her mouth, obviously grappling with the surrealness of the scene. Naruto, Ino whispered, stepping forward carefully, as though approaching a wounded animal. How? He couldn't form the words. The tang of death clung to the night air. It was going to kill someone, he said finally, voice husky. I just stopped it. Tenten and Ino exchanged glances. Neither seemed certain how to respond. Tenten clenched her fists, as though bracing herself. You saved people, she said quietly. That's all that matters. Ino nodded, though worry pinched her features. They'll call it what they want, but you did the right thing. A flicker of gratitude warmed Naruto's chest, but behind it lurked dread. How many more times would he have to do something like this? What would it mean for him, for the village, for the people close to him? Hinata arrived as well, out of breath, her jacket stained with soot. She must have helped evacuate civilians. She caught sight of the boar's lifeless body, then looked at Naruto. Confusion and sympathy warred in her pale eyes. He forced a reassuring nod, but the weight pressing on his shoulders refused to lift. He swore he could sense Yamraj's presence, like a shadow cast from an unseen sun, feeding on the fear around him. Moments later, a squad of masked Anbu rushed in. One, bearing the mark of the Hokage's personal guard, scanned the area. They asked for witnesses. They questioned the Chunin. And then they turned to Naruto. He braced himself for a barrage of interrogation, but it didn't come. They only told him to remain available for debriefing in the morning. Their measured words suggested they suspected more than they let on. The small group of onlookers parted as the Anbu started to clean up the scene. In the confusion, Naruto slipped away, heart racing. He kept to the dimly lit streets, ignoring the numb ache in his legs. He couldn't shake the echo of that moment when the boar collapsed. No jutsu he'd studied could kill so suddenly, so silently. Only that wave of darkness inside him. It was the same force that had hovered at the fringes of his dreams. He returned to his apartment in a daze. Once inside, he leaned against the door, sliding down until he sat on the floor, knees tucked against his chest. The adrenaline slowly ebbed, replaced by a swirl of emotions. Relief that no one else was hurt, horror at his lethal ability, and a grim satisfaction in having protected the village. A low whisper seemed to resonate in his thoughts. You are the son of Yamraj, killing is second nature to you. He clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms. Was he fated to be a harbinger of death? Or could he choose a different path? If his father truly was the god of death, did that condemn him to a future of taking lives with a mere thought? Footsteps sounded outside. He tensed until he heard Hinata's gentle knock, followed by Ino's sharper one. They must have tracked him here. He opened the door. The girls stepped in cautiously, glancing at the cramped living space. Ino's lips formed a wry smile. She'd probably expected more clutter. Hinata wrung her hands, uncertain how to start. Finally, She spoke, "Naruto, we just wanted to make sure you're safe." He hesitated, then nodded. Words failed him. The magnitude of what he'd done hung heavy in the air. Ino cleared her throat. "Look, I know what the others might say, but that creature was out of control. You saved that man's life. I I respect you for that, no matter how you did it." Hinata's voice trembled softly. "If you need help explaining things to the Hokage or the police force, we'll stand by you." Her sincerity almost broke him. He realized how precious it was to have people willing to see beyond the terror of his power. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "Thanks, I don't have the full story myself. But I'm glad you're here." The confession felt oddly vulnerable. They offered small smiles, relief in their eyes, and stayed for a short while, exchanging hesitant words of comfort. It was the closest Naruto had felt to real companionship in ages. Eventually, they left, promising to be on his side when the inevitable questions came tomorrow. Alone once more, he sank onto his bed. Fatigue weighed heavily on his limbs, but he sensed sleep wouldn't grant him peace tonight. After all, he had taken a life, even if it was a beast. It felt like stepping onto a path he'd never walk back from. Would more lives be claimed by his silent command? Lightning didn't boom. But in the stillness, he heard a faint laugh echo in the recesses of his mind, cold, ancient, dripping with dark triumph. Yamraj? Or something else? He gritted his teeth, refusing to yield. Whatever fate had in store, he wouldn't lose himself to it. If he truly was a child of death, then he'd wield that power on his own terms. Yet, as exhaustion finally pulled him under, the memory of the boar's final moment lingered like a stain on his soul, and that mocking, distant laugh followed him into the dream world. They gathered at dawn, summoned by Kakashi's brisk command. Naruto stood at the edge of the courtyard in silence, eyes half-lidded, the memory of the boar's abrupt death still chilling his veins. Sasuke arrived next, arms folded, posture tense. No words, just that sharp, measuring stare he always gave Naruto these days. Sakura appeared soon after, fussing with her gear, throwing anxious glances at Sasuke. They waited until the tall form of Kakashi Hitaki materialized like a ghost from behind the training hall. "Morning, team," Kakashi greeted lazily, but something about his tone was heavier than usual. "We've been assigned a C-rank mission to escort a bridge builder. Seems simple enough. We'll see how you handle it." Naruto gave a short nod, saying nothing. Inside, a quiet hum of power vibrated behind every heartbeat. He couldn't forget the silent demise of that rampaging beast, or the hushed terror from the villagers afterward. Now, leaving the village for a real mission felt both a relief, escape from suspicious eyes, and a risk. If his father's presence followed him beyond Konoha's walls, who knew what havoc it might cause? They met Tazuna at the main gate, the old bridge builder eyeing them dubiously. "These are my bodyguards," he muttered, gaze flicking over each member of Team 7. He paused on Naruto for an extra beat, brow furrowing, as if detecting the unspoken thread coiled around him. Then Tazuna shrugged, turning away without comment. They set out along the winding road that led away from the Fire Country's heart. Morning fog curled at their ankles, swirls of white that made the trees loom like silent sentinels. Naruto walked in front, scanning the path with a sharpness Kakashi didn't miss. Sasuke stayed close behind, restless tension in every movement. Sakura pelted Tazuna with polite questions, attempting to fill the quiet. Kakashi watched them all with a single visible eye, suspecting more danger than Tazuna's vague mission request implied. Within the first hour, they encountered a puddle in the middle of a dry road. Naruto caught the faint shimmer of chakra on the water's surface. A flicker of unease pricked his spine. Someone was hiding there. Sure enough, two figures burst from the puddle in a flash of steel, chains snarling as they lunged for Kakashi. Everything happened fast. Sasuke sprang forward, blocking their path. Steel clashed. Sakura darted back to protect Tazuna. Naruto felt that dark power surge, begging to be unleashed. Kill them. One glance. He inhaled sharply, forcing down the urge. He be a shinobi first, not a grim reaper. He flicked a kunai, aiming to disable rather than destroy. One of the demon brothers twisted away, his chain snapping at Naruto's side. Sasuke parried, eyes blazing with competitive ferocity. The clash lasted mere seconds before Kakashi reappeared, subduing both attackers with calm efficiency. "You're well informed for a simple bridge builder," Kakashi remarked to Tazuna once the dust settled, staring at the two defeated Mist Nin. Tazuna grimaced, stammering about Gado's criminal influences and how he needed the bridge completed to save his impoverished country. Kakashi sighed, realizing this mission was far more dangerous than advertised. As Kakashi interrogated the rogue Nin, Naruto drifted a few steps away, breath shallow. The power inside him still churned with lethal hunger. He clenched his fists. He'd been so close to using it again, to simply end their attackers with a thought. Every day that passed, he felt that presence getting louder, as though Yamraj himself were waiting in the wings, eager to see his son's darkness bloom. Sasuke approached, eyes dark. "You hesitated, didn't you? You had a clear shot." Naruto met his glare, refusing to show weakness. "I did what was necessary." "What's going on with you?" Sasuke's voice pitched low, anger edged with uncertainty. "You've changed." He paused, jaw tight. "Or maybe I'm just seeing what you really are." Naruto said nothing, tension thick enough to choke on. Kakashi's call broke the moment. "We're moving on. Keep your guard up." The next leg of the journey took them through thick woods, mist rolling in heavier by the minute. Tazuna explained that the closer they got to the land of waves, the more common these ambushes might be. Night fell quickly, forcing them to make camp under the tall pines. Sakura helped gather firewood, while Sasuke vanished to scout. Kakashi settled with Tazuna to discuss the situation in hushed tones. Naruto took first watch, sitting at the edge of the firelight. The forest beyond was a black sea. For a while, only the crackling flames and the soft chorus of night insects kept him company. Then, from the corner of his vision, a shape shifted among the trees. He snapped his gaze that way, nothing. But he felt it, the same chill presence that trailed him in Konoha, a whisper of death on the wind. He tensed, expecting a robed messenger to appear again. No figure stepped forward. Slowly, he forced himself to relax. Maybe it was just the trick of darkness. Still, the hair on his neck refused to lie flat. Morning arrived with gray skies and a distant hush of waves. They procured a small boat to ferry them across the mist-shrouded water to Tazuna's homeland. The boatman, clearly terrified of Gado's men, hardly spoke. Once on shore, they continued on foot toward the half-finished bridge that spanned the bay. A looming shape emerged in the mist. A solitary figure standing atop a felled tree, massive sword resting across his shoulders. Zabuza Momochi. His presence announced itself like a suffocating wave, heavy with killing intent. Kakashi's voice dropped to a lethal calm. "Team, protect Tazuna. This man's in a different league." Naruto felt an immediate resonance. Zabuza's aura was steeped in violence, but it was mortal violence. Where Naruto's power scraped at the boundary between worlds, Zabuza's was simply the result of brutal training and savage will. Their eyes met, and Naruto almost sensed the older shinobi's curiosity flare. It was as if Zabuza could smell the faint perfume of the underworld on Naruto's skin. "You," Zabuza rasped, shifting his gaze from Kakashi to Naruto. "You smell like death. This is interesting." Sasuke bristled, stepping forward. "Don't ignore me." Zabuza laughed, a harsh sound. "Sorry, kid, but that one," he jerked his chin toward Naruto, "reeks of something I've never seen." Then he hurtled his sword in a blur of motion. Kakashi barked for the team to spread out. The blade whirled, missing them by inches, biting into a tree trunk. Water clones appeared, flanking them, while Zabuza darted in for Kakashi with shocking speed. The clash exploded with swirling mist, steel on steel. Sasuke tried to engage, kunai sparking off a water clone's blade. Sakura hovered protectively near Tazuna, face pale but resolute. Naruto found himself locked in a one-on-one dance with another clone. For a moment, the clone pressed an advantage, forcing him back. Then the cold whisper in Naruto's mind urged him, "Stop playing." He felt that lethal energy surge, and in one swift motion, he turned a palm outward. The clone stumbled, pausing as though something had snagged its essence. Its water form flickered, and Naruto's eyes narrowed, releasing a burst of spiritual force. The clone collapsed into a puddle with an almost pitiful splash. A real threat loomed behind him. Zabuza's sword whistled through the mist, Ayak. Kakashi had forced Zabuza back from Tazuna, but now the missing nin pivoted to strike the seemingly weakest link. Naruto spun and locked eyes with him. In that heartbeat, Naruto felt the gravitational pull of Zabuza's soul, an urge to claim it, to sever life with a single thought. His chest constricted. If he used it, Zabuza would die instantly. He would save Kakashi, save his teammates, but he'd become that monster again. Yet before he could decide, Kakashi intercepted with a burst of speed, jamming a kunai toward Zabuza's ribs. Steel clashed, water exploded, and both men skidded apart. Zabuza licked his lips beneath his bandaged mask. Interesting. If you can kill me with a mere look, why hesitate, boy? Naruto froze, blood roaring in his ears. Had Zabuza guessed? Kakashi's gaze flicked to Naruto, puzzled, but there wasn't time to ask. Zabuza raised his hands, summoning swirling spheres of water around them, aiming to trap Kakashi in a water prison. The sensei gestured for the team to fall back, but Naruto refused. He dashed forward, a surge of chakra blazing from his palms. Zabuza sneered, adjusting his jutsu. But Sasuke seized the moment, flinging shuriken to disrupt his hand signs. For an instant, the momentum fell on Team 7's side. Kakashi broke free from the half-formed prison, launching a counter. Blade clanged on blade, jutsu crackled against jutsu, the atmosphere thick with lethal intent. Amid the chaos, Naruto felt the edges of his own power flaring, a blackish haze that only he could truly sense. Zabuza aimed a strike that forced Kakashi off balance. Victory seemed within the missing nin's reach. That was when Naruto chose to act. In a blur, he leapt behind Zabuza, forming a Rasengan. Or rather a swirling sphere of raw chakra. It wasn't the standard color. Flickers of dark energy danced at its core, reflecting the shadows inside him. Zabuza whipped around, sword raised, but Naruto slammed the sphere into the steel, sending out a shockwave that cracked the very air. Zabuza was hurled back, flipping mid-air to land crouched on a tree branch, sword tip digging into the bark. Breathing ragged, Naruto suppressed the kill thought that buzzed in his skull. One glance. That's all it would take. Yet something in him resisted. Zabuza, for his part, looked rattled but enthralled. "You're no ordinary genin," he muttered. Then he realized Kakashi was already weaving signs. Lightning sparked around the Jonin's hand. Chidori. Zabuza had to dodge, and the battle lurched forward again. In the end, neither side achieved a decisive victory. The swirling mist concealed a figure with a mask, Haku, who intervened, whisking Zabuza away under the pretense of recovering his dying body. Team 7 regrouped, battered and breathless. Kakashi pressed a hand to his side, eyes sharp and worried. Tazuna trembled behind a half-toppled log, face pale from witnessing such ferocity. Sasuke glared at Naruto, frustration etched on his features. He was driven mad by how easily Naruto wielded that swirling darkness. Sakura sagged in relief, exhausted from stress. Naruto gazed at the bloodstained ground where Zabuza once stood, mind whirling. The demon of the mist had sensed that monstrous aspect of him, called him out on it. The fact that Naruto hadn't unleashed his lethal thought weighed heavy. Maybe it was restraint. Maybe it was fear of crossing a line that would define him forever. Kakashi studied him curiously, no immediate comment, though a flicker of respect and unease glimmered in the Jonin's eye. The team trudged on toward Tazuna's home to regroup, battered but alive. Haku and Zabuza lingered in the mists, plotting a return. Naruto could feel it in his bones. The mission was far from over. And something else brewed inside him, the sense that his father's domain had followed him here, as though the land of waves would be the next stage for the heir of the god of death to learn what it truly meant to wield such a fearsome destiny. He clenched his fists, still grappling with what he'd done, and what he had refused to do. They took shelter in Tazuna's modest home by late afternoon. The house sat perched at the water's edge, the unfinished bridge looming in the near distance like a promise unfulfilled. Tazuna's daughter greeted them with wary kindness, serving bowls of hot soup while casting anxious glances at the injuries they carried. Kakashi leaned against a wall, recovering his breath, eyes half closed beneath his hite-8. Sakura fussed over Sasuke's bruises, though he waved her off. Naruto found a corner by the door, unsettled energy roiling inside him, mind dwelling on the confrontation with Zabuza. That night, the wind rattled loose shutters, and the ocean churned against wooden pilings. Naruto lay awake on a small futon. Fatigue heavy in his limbs but his thoughts too restless for sleep. Every time he shut his eyes, the memory replayed. Zabuza's mocking challenge, that single heartbeat where he could have ended the missing nin with a glance. A cold knot formed in his chest. If he tapped into that power, whose eyes would regard him in the mirror afterward, his own, or Yamraj's? He drifted into a fragile doze. Darkness engulfed him, an echo of the nightmares he'd come to know too well. He stood again in the vast underworld corridor, torchlight flickering across glistening obsidian walls. A sense of expectation pulsed in the hot, stale air. A wave of black smoke rolled through the hallway, coalescing into the shape of a robed messenger. It hovered silently, then beckoned him forward. Each footstep rang hollow on the stone, until he reached a broad archway carved with skeletal designs. Beyond it lay a grand chamber. No throne this time, but a wide arena of cracked basalt. Shadows writhed along the edges, ghostly faces flickering like embers. Then, for the first time, the figure spoke with a voice that scratched like claws on rock. "He watches, Naruto, your father waits." A flash of molten gold eyes seared the darkness, and a surge of dread tore Naruto awake. He gasped, chest heaving, sweat slick on his brow. Dawn light was creeping through the window, painting the modest room in a pale hush. Kakashi was already gone, likely off to scout for Zabuza's next move. Sasuke and Sakura stirred. Neither noticed Naruto's tremors, and he preferred it that way. Over the next few days, they prepared for a final clash. Kakashi drilled them in new tactics. After each session, Naruto would isolate himself by the water, practicing with shadow clones to hone his control, determined not to rely on that lethal ability. He recalled how easily he nearly killed the boar back in Konoha. Letting that chill slip free again felt like handing over the reins of his soul. Sasuke watched from a distance, scowling with curiosity. He sensed Naruto's tension, the friction of immense power reined in by brute will. One evening, while Sakura tended to Zuna's tired daughter, Sasuke approached. No words at first, just that bristling aura of rivalry and caution. Finally, he demanded to know what Naruto was hiding. Naruto's answer was a stony stare, guarded and weary. Sasuke let out a frustrated huff and stalked off. When Zabuza's return came, it arrived with early morning fog so thick the bridge vanished in white haze. The air tasted of iron. Kakashi led them out to the skeleton of steel beams and half-poured concrete. Tazuna braved the swirling mist, jaw set in stubborn determination. Then the ambush began. Water needles, ice mirrors sprouting at impossible angles. Haku emerged in a graceful blur, eyes solemn behind a porcelain mask. Zabuza's menacing silhouette hovered just beyond. Kakashi and Zabuza clashed once more, raw chakra crackling like thunder. Sasuke and Sakura rushed to protect Tazuna, while Naruto found himself drawn into Haku's crystalline domain. Mirrors gleamed with reflections of countless senbon, an icy labyrinth. Haku's voice was gentle but resolute, urging Naruto to surrender. Each reflection seemed to judge him, see into the depths of his soul. He's GTO realized. Haku fought with skill and pity, never striking a fatal blow. An eerie hush fell in the swirling mist. Zabuza lunged for Kakashi. Sasuke tried to intercept, but Zabuza batted him aside, sword humming. Naruto's pulse hammered. Another life on the brink. The black power flickered at the edges of his consciousness, beckoning him to end the threat instantly. A horrifying temptation. A single thought could stop Zabuza's heart mid-stroke. But that would be stepping over a line he'd refused to cross once already. Caught between duty and dread, Naruto roared, channeling chakra into a swirling vortex of energy at his palm. Threads of darkness curled through the spiraling sphere, a fraction of that secret inheritance. He dashed across the slippery girders, locked onto Zabuza's exposed flank. Haku flung himself in the way, desperate to protect his mentor. In that split second, Naruto's heart seized. If he unleashed the full extent of his technique, Haku would die. And maybe a piece of Naruto's soul would die along with him. He shifted his angle, slamming the swirling chakra into the steel underfoot. The resulting shockwave ripped across the bridge, sending Haku staggering backward. Zabuza spun, forced off balance. Kakashi seized the moment, lightning-charged kunai biting deep into Zabuza's side. Blood splattered across concrete, a single exhalation of shock escaping the demon of the mist before he dropped to a knee. A strangled shout left Haku's lips. The masked shinobi lunged to shield Zabuza, cradling him protectively. Silence, broken only by the hiss of wind-driven fog. Kakashi withdrew, breathing hard, eye unreadable. Sasuke nursed a shallow cut on his arm. Sakura and Tazuna stared wide-eyed, uncertain if the threat had ended. Naruto froze, trembling from the adrenaline and the war raging inside him. He'd stopped short of killing anyone with that lethal thought, yet the taste of that power lingered on his tongue like bitterness. Zabuza coughed a hoarse laugh. Haku tore off the mask, tears brimming, frantically trying to staunch the wound. Kakashi lowered his guard just enough to speak, voice barely above a whisper. "If you walk any farther down this path, you'll find only death waiting," he murmured to the fallen swordsman. Zabuza managed a scoff, gaze flicking once toward Naruto. In those final moments of consciousness, it was as though he acknowledged something monstrous, and was strangely impressed that Naruto had chosen not to unleash it. A new storm of footsteps approached from the far side of the bridge, Gado's thugs, armed to the teeth. They planned to betray Zabuza and finish the job themselves. Fury twisted Haku's features as he prepared to defend his master, but Zabuza, wounded and bleeding, gave a weak snarl. Kakashi, Sasuke, and Naruto formed a line, steeling themselves. It looked like a last stand. Naruto took a slow breath. The boar in Konoha, the rampaging clones, Zabuza's twisted grin, everything converged in his mind. Protecting the innocent didn't have to mean drowning the world in silent death. He could fight without becoming the scythe that reaped every soul in sight. So he let his chakra flare bright, overshadowing that dark presence just enough to stand firm with his team. Gado's men hesitated at the intensity of the combined resolve they faced. In that moment, Naruto realized, sometimes strength is choosing to spare a life. Sometimes strength is drawing a line in the sand. And, for now, that was enough to keep the god of death at bay, even if only for a little while. Word of Gado's sudden downfall spread swiftly through the land of waves. By the time dawn arrived the next day, the villagers ventured onto the newly completed bridge, finally free to hope. Team 7 lingered just long enough to see Tazuna's people rejoice, bright-eyed children running over the sturdy planks that spanned the misty bay. Naruto stood at the edge, gazing out over the water. The moment felt oddly serene considering how violently it had all ended. Zabuza was gone, and Haku's fate wove a trail of sorrow behind him. But the land of waves had a future again. Kakashi urged them back to Konoha soon after, pointing out that their job was done and their injuries needed real attention. The journey home felt twice as long as the trip out, partly because exhaustion weighed on them. Sakura kept glancing at Sasuke's bandaged arm, mind busy on her team's well-being. Sasuke, stoic as ever, remained silent, though from time to time he'd throw Naruto a brooding glance. Kakashi walked at the rear, nose buried in his familiar orange book, yet everyone knew his watchful eye never really rested. Naruto found himself haunted by the memory of that swirling darkness he had nearly unleashed. Though he refused to kill Zabuza with a mere thought, that power still stirred restlessly beneath his skin, calling out like a half-starved beast. He wondered if, someday, he'd lose the will to restrain it. The question gnawed at him every time he felt a faint chill at the base of his spine, his father's presence, or some ominous echo of the underworld. He couldn't decide which was worse. They reached the hidden leaf gates at dusk. After a brief report to the Hokage's office, they were released to rest. Kakashi gave them a few days off for recovery before official missions resumed. Sakura made a beeline for the hospital to ensure Sasuke's wound would heal without complications. Sasuke mumbled that he was fine, but there was a flicker of frustrated respect in his eyes when he glanced at Naruto. Nothing more was said. Naruto slipped away into the crowds of the village. Konoha's streets bustled with warmth and chatter. Lights glowed in shop windows, merchants hawked steaming food. Yet Naruto couldn't ignore the subtle stir that followed him. People recognized him. Some recalled the boar incident, rumors swirling that he'd killed it with uncanny ease. He picked up hushed fragments of conversation as he passed. A few murmured in grudging admiration. Others whispered of dread. The tension lay thick in the air. He kept his head high but walked quickly, longing for a quiet corner. He found some refuge at Ichiraku Ramen, where steam curled up from bowls of broth in comforting swirls. Tucci greeted him with a grin, making no mention of rumors or hush-hush talk, and Naruto felt a knot in his chest loosen. Halfway through his first bowl, though, Hinata appeared beside him. She'd been lingering at the entrance, working up the courage to approach. When Naruto looked over, she offered a small, tremulous smile. "Welcome back," she said softly, taking a seat. Are you okay?" He considered brushing off the question with a dismissive joke but caught the genuine concern in her pale eyes. He nodded. "I'm fine. Just had a rough mission." That was all he needed to say. She didn't pry further, though her eyes spoke volumes of her worry. They sat in companionable silence, the noise of the street receding. Hinata looked down at her own untouched bowl, cheeks tinged pink. When she finally dared to meet his gaze, Naruto felt a flicker of gratitude that someone could look at him without fear. Later that night, he returned to his apartment. He passed by the same old doors and scuffed walls as always, but something had changed. He sensed watchers, presences that vanished from the corners of his eyes. Danzo's men, perhaps, or maybe Anbu suspicious of his unnatural aura. Naruto slid the door shut behind him, leaning against the frame, mind racing. A part of him wondered if the Hokage himself suspected the truth. But Naruto recalled the Sandame's kind gaze. If he knew, would he treat Naruto differently? He shook off the uneasy thoughts, telling himself he'd worry about it tomorrow. Morning arrived with news that the Chunin exams were looming. Posters decorated the village, announcing the grand event that would draw teams from all the major hidden villages. Naruto spotted a bold banner across one of Konoha's main thoroughfares. "Prove your worth. Chunin exams begin soon." His pulse spurred Iruka's lectures about the exam's importance, how it was more than just a test. It was a delicate stage for alliances and rivalries between ninja villages. This year, Konoha hosted, meaning the eyes of the world would be on them. In the training grounds, Naruto found Ino and Tenten sparring. Ino's sharp gaze cut to him as he approached. "I hear you're back. Finally done playing hero in the land of waves?" She said it lightly, but her eyes flickered with genuine relief. Tenten paused mid-throw, nodding in greeting before sending a kunai hissing into a wooden target. "Bullseye." "Yeah," Naruto said, keeping his tone neutral. "Looks like we've got bigger things ahead." He jerked his chin toward the exam posters in the distance. Tenten's eyes brightened at the thought, while Ino pursed her lips thoughtfully. They invited him to join their practice. He slipped into a comfortable rhythm, exchanging shuriken throws with Tenten, practicing quick illusions under Ino's watchful eye. After a while, they paused for water. Tenten casually asked about the land of waves. Naruto gave them the condensed version. Bridge completed. Gato out of the picture. A few tough fights. He spared them the details of Zabuza's near death and the dark power he'd nearly unleashed. Ino studied him as he spoke, a flash of curiosity in her gaze. She likely sensed he was holding back, but didn't push. Soon, they parted ways. Naruto continued to the forest's edge, searching for an open spot where he could train alone. He needed to find a balance with the swirling cold in his core, a way to keep it under control without letting it consume him. As he wove through the trees, he felt a sudden shift in the air. Instinct flared. He spun, kunai at the ready. But it was just a fleeting shape in the canopy. A root or a black-robed figure, gone in a blink. His heartbeat thundered. He scanned the branches, caught no trace. Still, the invisible watcher felt close. Determined not to let paranoia stifle him, he pressed on until he reached a quiet clearing strewn with dappled sunlight. There, he tested his chakra with basic jutsu, forming clones and illusions, building up to the swirling sphere technique he'd improvised against Zabuza. Each time that sphere churned in his hand, he sensed dark threads creeping in along the edges. He'd push them back, forcing the energy to remain purely his. Yet the more he resisted, the more it strained against him. Eventually, exhausted, he let the jutsu fade, dropping to a knee. Sweat trickled down his temples. He stared at his shaking hands. Could he truly keep this up, day after day? A twig snapped. He looked up to find Moro, the academy teacher who had been suspicious before, standing on the outskirts of the clearing. Pale eyes flickered to the swirl of smoke still dissipating from Naruto's jutsu. Naruto sprang upright, trying to regain composure, adrenaline spiking. Moro's presence was strangely invasive, as though he bled into the forest's stillness without disturbing it. "You've grown," Moro said quietly, voice resonating with a measured calm. And that technique you just attempted, it's not something typical for a genin. Naruto kept his guard up. Should you be spying on students out here? Moro's lips curved in a faint smile. I was merely walking. The forest is open to all. His gaze hardened. You know you can't hide it forever. What you really are. People are already whispering. Death follows you. It clings to your aura. Something cold twisted in Naruto's gut. Did Moro know the truth, or was he fishing for a reaction? You don't know anything about me, Naruto said, forcing more confidence than he felt. Moro tilted his head. Perhaps not, but I intend to find out. Then he turned, footsteps silent in the thick grass. Within seconds, he vanished among the trees, leaving Naruto alone with a thudding heart. He swallowed, trying to steady himself. The teacher's cryptic tone lingered like a specter, a reminder that the upcoming exam wouldn't be just about battles and promotions. There were eyes on him, both mortal and otherwise. Days sped by, the village abuzz with visiting teams. Kage's envoy from the sand arrived first, followed by the Cloud's delegation, and squads from every corner of the ninja world. Naruto spotted Gaara of the desert, a red-haired boy with haunted eyes, who walked with an oppressive presence. It vaguely reminded Naruto of his own dark aura, though Gaara's felt more like a caged monster thirsting for carnage. Their gazes locked briefly in a crowded hallway, a silent exchange of recognition. Naruto swore he saw a flicker of curiosity mirrored in Gaara's stare. When the Chunin exams sign-up day arrived, Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura lined up with other rookie teams. The corridor bustled with eager chatter, tension thick as steel cables. Familiar faces dotted the crowd. Ino with Shikamaru and Choji. Tenten alongside Neji and Lee. Kiba with Shino and Hinata. Over the throng, Naruto noticed Moro observing the scene from a balcony. Their eyes met, and the teacher vanished behind a sliding screen. Naruto clenched his jaw, forcing the unease aside. They advanced to the first trial, a written exam under strict proctor supervision. Ibiki Morino's ruthless aura hung over them like a predator. Naruto recalled Iruka's mention of hidden rules, deception, and trick questions. This was no normal test. The participants had to gather answers covertly. Fortunately, Naruto had an unlikely edge. Occasionally, he sensed the faint voices of wandering spirits, as though the dead lingered near. When he closed his eyes in silent concentration, he caught whispers of answers gleaned from floating watchers no one else could see. It felt unethical, but desperation trumped morals here, and besides, what else was the Son of Death supposed to do? He finished just in time, scrawling the final line before the proctor barked for pencils down. The tension in the room soared, some participants folding under the pressure ejected for cheating. Ibiki revealed his final twist. Those who answered incorrectly could never take the exam again. A hush of dread fell, until he gave a brusque laugh, praising the brave souls who stayed. Papers rustled, and the examinees breathed shakily. Naruto's heart hammered, but he forced a grin, relief surging that he'd passed the mental gambit. The next challenge arrived with an ominous name, the Forest of Death. Enko Mitarashi greeted them with a manic smile, tossing disclaimers about the life-threatening wilderness. Each team received a scroll, heaven or earth, and instructions to retrieve the other type from rival teams. They had to survive and reach the central tower. At her announcement, the gates swung open, revealing a stretch of dense, foreboding forest. The test began, and teams slipped in like ghosts, each determined to outsmart the others. Team 7 plunged into the gloom, silent except for the crunch of undergrowth underfoot. Sasuke led with watchful eyes, Sakura stayed close, and Naruto scanned the perimeter, oddly attuned to the hush around them. At times, it almost felt welcoming. The place teemed with unseen spirits, echoes of fallen shinobi from exams past. A couple of times, Naruto heard rustling leaves or distant howls, but their first real threat came in the form of a colossal leech-like creature that lunged from the canopy. They dodged, a flurry of kunai driving it off. Hardly a break went by before they faced a second surprise. A rival team from the grass. The confrontation ended in a tense standoff, each side reluctant to reveal their scroll or risk a direct fight. But the forest itself was the biggest adversary: thick vines, hidden marshes, poisonous insects. On the second day, they encountered a violent storm that turned the ground into sticky mud. An unsettling presence roamed in the distance, too strong, Sasuke said under his breath, as though some monstrous aura lurked among the trees. It set Naruto's nerves on edge. More than once, he felt the dark power stir, urging threat with a mere thought. He refused, clinging to the idea that he could do this the shinobi way, not as a reaper. On the third evening, as the sun sank into a fiery horizon, they stumbled upon a grisly sight. A rival squad, collapsed under a tree, eyes hollowed with terror. Sasuke checked their pulses, face grim. They were dead. Not a scratch on them, no sign of an external wound. Just fear contorting their features. Sakura paled, stepping back, horror dancing in her eyes. What could have done this? She whispered. Naruto didn't answer. He had a sickening suspicion, dread climbing his spine. Whoever, or whatever, delivered death like that might share roots with the same dominion Naruto fought to control. They pressed on, pushing through tangles and swarms of insects. From time to time, they heard distant skirmishes, but the forest's gloom swallowed nearly all light. On the fourth day, they finally confronted a team from the Rain Village. The fight burst into a barrage of ninjutsu. Naruto's clone feints, Sasuke's cunning throws, Sakura's well-timed illusions. The enemy reeled under the coordinated assault. In the heat of it, one Rain Kunoichi tried to ambush Naruto from behind. He spun, eyes flashing. A black haze flickered around his right hand, but he forced Chakra into a standard blow instead, punching her away without delivering a fatal wave of death. She crashed into a tree and slumped, groaning. His heart pounded. He'd narrowly held back the lethal thought again. In the confusion, Sasuke snatched the Rain team's scroll. Earth, exactly what they needed. Adrenaline soared. They had both scrolls now. Sakura gave a shaky grin, though her relief was tempered by the encounter's close call. Together, they darted away, navigating by landmarks through the final leg toward the central tower. The thick canopy parted eventually, revealing the building's silhouette. A looming structure that towered above the foliage. They burst inside to find other teams already present, some battered, some smugly victorious. Enko greeted them with that same predatory grin, congratulating their survival. Naruto half expected Moro to appear among the examiners, but the mysterious teacher was nowhere in sight. Instead, he felt another oppressive presence closing in. Orochimaru was there, concealed among the onlookers or hidden in some unsuspecting place. A rumor circulated among the survivors. A strange grass nin with impossible powers had wreaked havoc in the forest. Sasuke seemed tense, eyes distant. Naruto shuddered, recalling the dead squad with no visible wounds. Could Orochimaru be behind that, testing each participant's darkest vulnerabilities? But for now, they'd passed the second stage. A wave of relief swept the genin who remained. As day broke over the tower, proctors herded them into a wide hall for final announcements. The next challenge would be a preliminary round. Too many participants had survived. Watching from the sidelines, Naruto felt the tension build once more. Rivalries bristled in the air. Gaara's silent menace, the Sound Ninja's twitchy hunger for violence, Kiba's determined grin, Neji's inscrutable calm. Yet behind all of it, Naruto sensed a deeper current. A chill that whispered of greater forces at play. And an inexorable question hovered in his mind. How long can I keep death at arm's length? Before the proctors could begin the bracket assignments, Hinata caught Naruto's eye across the hall. She offered a small wave, relief and pride brightening her cheeks. Ino stood nearby, sparing Naruto a confident smirk. Tenten, arms folded, gave him a respectful nod. 3 glances from 3 different kunoichi. And in each, Naruto felt a distinct connection, a reminder that he wasn't wholly alone in this swirling chaos. He returned their gestures with a subdued smile. Moments later, the screen flickered to display names for the upcoming matches. Gasps and murmurs erupted among the crowd. One by one, genin studied the board, hearts pounding. When Naruto's name appeared alongside a foreign kunoichi, a hush settled around him. He swallowed, ignoring the heavy stares. This was it. His first step into the public eye as more than just a curiosity. The thought both thrilled and unsettled him. The proctor signaled the first match to begin, and the rest of the participants cleared the arena floor, climbing onto the surrounding balconies to watch. As the tension mounted, Naruto stretched his arms, forcing calm into his veins. He prepared himself to fight like any normal shinobi. Jutsu, strategy, reflex. Not the silent flick of finality. If he could face Zabuza without succumbing, then certainly he could handle a fellow genin. And yet a nagging dread lingered. The forest of death had proven that not everyone survived these trials, and the taste of real danger still lingered on Naruto's tongue. With the watchful eyes of the Leaf's shinobi, and possibly Yamraj, upon him, Naruto stepped forward. A hush fell, the proctor raised a hand, and he prepared to face the unknown opponent who would test him in ways no academy spar ever could. He drew a breath, focusing on the swirl of chakra in his gut, keeping the black threads of fatherly inheritance locked away. One step at a time, he told himself. One match, one victory, without becoming the agent of death he feared he might be. The proctor's voice rang out, echoing off stone walls. Begin, and with that word, the Chunin exam preliminaries erupted into a storm of ambition, rivalry, and secrets that would echo through Konoha for years to come. Especially for the one who carried death in his veins. The proctor's shout echoed in the exam hall, rattling the tension in the air. Naruto stood across from Akunoichi with midnight hair pulled into a high ponytail, her forehead protector marked with the Sound Village insignia. She regarded him with a cool, almost dismissive glint in her eyes. From the upper balconies, the other genin watched in a hush of excitement and unease. A few cheered or hollered, but most simply held their breath, sensing the undercurrent of danger in the room. Naruto inhaled slowly. Every cell in his body vibrated with adrenaline. He needed to fight like a normal shinobi, using standard jutsu and tactics, not that black, twisting power inside him. It was enough that dark rumors already followed him around. If he unleashed Yamraja's legacy in front of so many witnesses, Sasuke, Hinata, Ino, Tenten, and even the exam officials, he'd never erase the fear that would surely take root. He clenched his fists and waited, letting the proctor's cue sink in. Begin. The examiner repeated, and in a blur, the sound Kunoichi launched forward. Naruto sidestepped her opening strike, feeling the brush of wind as her kunai sliced past his sleeve. He retaliated with a clone feint, sending two shadow clones out wide while he pivoted behind her. She twisted, planting a fierce kick into one clone's ribs, dispersing it in a puff of smoke. The second clone seized her arm from behind. She spat something under her breath, channeling a high-pitched screech of chakra that shattered the clone instantly. Naruto winced as the sonic waves rippled in the air, rattling his bones. He pressed a hand to his ear, forced to retreat a step. She capitalized on his moment of hesitation, lashing out with a flurry of strikes that drove him back across the arena floor. Cheers flared from her teammates in the stands, but Naruto stayed calm. The real fight had barely started. He threw down a smoke bomb, the cloud billowing thick and gray, masking his shape. Then, in the instant of concealment, he dashed behind her again, chakra swirling into his palm. It wasn't the same ominous sphere he'd used against Zabuza. He tried to craft pure blue energy this time, untainted by the inky threads of his father's domain. She sensed the danger and whirled, dropping low and slamming a fist at his midsection. The blow connected, forcing a grunt from Naruto's lungs, but he still thrust his swirling chakra toward her. She parried with a burst potent it cracked the arena floor beneath her feet, deflecting the bulk of his attack. Both of them staggered back, breathing heavily. Around them, the audience murmured. This was no half-hearted scuffle. Up in the balcony, Hinata pressed her hands together anxiously, Byakugan active, trying to track Naruto's chakra. Ino and Tenten stood nearby, each wearing their own brand of concern. Tenten's brow creased, seeing how Naruto restrained himself. She sensed he had more power than he was letting on. Ino pursed her lips, reading Naruto's body language with practiced intuition. She'd guessed for a while that he carried a secret, something that went beyond normal shinobi training, and here he was, carefully treading a line she couldn't fully see. Meanwhile, the sound Kunoichi bared her teeth, clearly displeased that she hadn't put Naruto down already. She formed a rapid seal, drawing out twin devices shaped like tuning forks. A jarring noise followed, slicing through the air in rippling arcs, forcing Naruto to brace himself. Behind him, the arena walls vibrated so violently that dust fell from the rafters. The watchers shielded their ears. Naruto realized he'd have to end this quickly. He flicked a glance at the proctor, still waiting, no sign of interference yet. Another wave of sonic force hammered the floor. Naruto's vision blurred under the assault, but he grit his teeth, focusing chakra into his legs. He burst forward in a zigzag pattern, clones flickering in and out to disorient her. She destroyed 2 illusions, missed the real him, then wheeled around just in time to block an incoming strike. She tried another sonic blast. He dipped low, hooking his leg behind her ankle to trip her. She toppled, and he thrust a kunai at her neck, refusing to yield to the twinge of pity in his chest. She froze. "Yield," he commanded through gritted teeth. For a beat, she glared at him, chest heaving, sound devices still clutched tight. But her advantage had slipped. Slowly, she exhaled. She glanced at the proctor, who nodded grimly. The match concluded. A swell of cheers and scattered applause rose around the hall. Relief washed over Naruto, muscles trembling with spent energy. His face contorted momentarily, warring with the knowledge that he'd only avoided using that darker power by a hair. Part of him cursed the necessity of such self-restraint. Winning was that much harder without letting a fraction of his father's dominion slip free. But if winning proved possible this way, then maybe he could keep resisting, for now. The proctor declared him the victor. He helped the sound kunoichi up, giving her a respectful nod. She said nothing, but her eyes burned with resentment. She turned away, limping off the arena floor, and Naruto made his way back to the stands. A swirl of thoughts taunted him. How easily he could have ended it if he let the Reaper side of him reign, and how relieved he was that he didn't. When he passed Kakashi, the Jonin offered a faint thumbs up, and something akin to pride shone in that single visible eye. The preliminaries rolled on. Fights flickered past in a haze of clashing jutsu and desperate gambits. Ino faced a kunoichi from the waterfall, engaging in a tense mind transfer standoff that ended with Ino's narrow victory. Tenten fought a sand nin who used puppet mastery, narrowly winning by outsmarting the puppet's range. Hinata squared off against a stone nin wielding earth-based illusions, and though Hinata's nerves nearly got the better of her, she managed to push through by combining gentle fist strikes and surprising reserves of courage. Naruto watched each match with pounding anticipation, realizing these girls, in different ways, all gravitated toward him. Friendship, admiration, maybe deeper feelings. He felt both unworthy and profoundly grateful. Sasuke took the floor next, facing an opponent from the sound. Everyone tensed, recalling rumors about Orochimaru lurking in the background. Sasuke fought with controlled brutality, forced to manage the cursed mark's pull. His newly awakened edge, whatever Kakashi had done to help him, made him formidable. He triumphed, though not without clutching his shoulder in agony at the end, an ugly black pattern creeping beneath his clothes. Sakura ran to him, trembling with worry. Amid it all, Naruto spotted Moro, his suspicious academy teacher, observing from a high vantage, arms folded. Their gazes locked for a chilling moment before Moro turned and walked away. Another thread of tension pulled taut in Naruto's heart. He sensed the teacher was waiting for him to slip, to reveal something too dangerous for Konoha to ignore. At last, the dust settled, and those who advanced were gathered before the proctors. The final stage of the Chunin exams would happen in a month, giving the victors time to train. Naruto scanned the winners. Sasuke with that haunted look in his eyes, Gaara standing unnervingly still, Neji looking calm yet predatory, Shikamaru yawning like he'd rather be anywhere else, plus several foreign genin brimming with confidence. Despite the swirl of rivalry, Naruto felt an odd unity among them. Everyone had endured the preliminaries, earned a shot at the final spotlight. Just as the proctors concluded, Orochimaru made a fleeting appearance in the crowd, disguised, a mask slipping just enough for Naruto to notice. A cold tingle clawed at Naruto's spine. He recalled the story of that grass ninja rumored to have slaughtered a squad with no visible wounds. Could Orochimaru sense the Reaper aura too? Did he covet it, the way he coveted Sasuke's Sharingan? Naruto silently vowed not to let that serpent-like man twist his existence into another experiment. After the preliminaries ended, the participants trickled out of the exam hall. Some left for the hospital, others for private training. Naruto found himself lingering. Gaara passed by, amber eyes flickering with lethal curiosity. He paused, as if to speak, but then said nothing, turning away. The tension was tangible, two forces that recognized the killing weight each carried. Naruto stared after him, vaguely unsettled, reminded of how unstoppable Gaara's sand seemed in previous matches. If they met in the finals, it might well become a monsters showdown. Stepping into the corridor, Naruto nearly collided with Ino, who gave him a once-over. "Hey," she said, voice hushed after the exam's strain. "You really pushed it out there. You good?" He managed a small grin, ignoring the way his arm muscles ached. "I'm still in one piece." "Barely," Tenten teased, coming up behind Ino. "Looked like you were holding back, though, like you had more to give." She arched an eyebrow, inviting a confession, but Naruto only shrugged. A heartbeat later, Hinata appeared from behind them, fiddling with her jacket zipper. Her face was flushed, either from the match or from seeing Naruto. "I'm glad you won," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't doubt it for a second." A murmur of warmth spread through him, surprising in its intensity. He scratched his cheek awkwardly. "Thanks, all of you." He realized these three had become a quiet pillar of support for him. Each in different ways, each wanting to see him succeed. The weight of that knowledge pressed gently on his chest, both reassuring and stirring something more complicated. He smiled, though the moment was cut short when the proctor's call echoed down the hallway, summoning the finalists for last-minute instructions. They parted ways, agreeing to catch up after everyone had rested. Naruto joined the group being funneled into a smaller chamber. There, they learned about the 1-month break before the final matches, how it was meant for specialized training and strategy. Orochimaru's mention flitted across the briefing, though in veiled words. Some acknowledgement that a dangerous figure might be lurking around. Naruto's eyes wandered the room, noticing Moro standing near the far wall, taking notes. The teacher's presence among the officials felt Ofmed alarmed. Maybe he had a background in exam oversight that Naruto never knew about. Once dismissed, Naruto slipped out into the fresh air, the sun at a late afternoon angle. Sasuke was nowhere to be seen. Probably whisked off by Kakashi for secrecy. Sakura lingered by the steps, uncertain, torn between wanting to help Sasuke and feeling helpless. Naruto offered her a calm reassurance, but she barely looked at him, her concern fixed on the Uchiha. He didn't blame her. Everyone had their own burdens. To clear his head, he roamed the village aimlessly, absorbing the hum of daily life that felt so starkly different from the cutthroat world inside the exam hall. Eventually, he found himself at one of the lesser-used training grounds. A flat expanse with a few battered targets, overshadowed by tall pines. Leaning against a trunk, arms crossed, was Jiraiya the Toad Sage. Naruto nearly tripped, stunned to see one of the legendary Sannin waiting for him, as though expecting his arrival. "Why you're," Naruto stammered. The only reason he recognized Jiraiya on sight was from rumors and the occasional mention by villagers. Jiraiya flashed a lopsided grin. "Hey, Gaki. Word is you're in the finals and you've got some interesting gifts. Thought I'd see for myself if you're worth teaching." He tapped a scroll against his palm. "If you want to master that fancy swirling chakra thing, I might be able to help. But first, I gotta confirm a few details." Naruto tensed. Was Jiraiya referencing the fox sealed in him, or something else entirely? Did the old hermit suspect that Naruto held an even darker lineage? Hesitation gnawed at Naruto's chest. If Jiraiya discovered Yamraj's mark, would he run to the Hokage? Would he see Naruto as a threat? But Jiraiya only motioned for him to follow. They spent hours testing basic chakra control near a stream, Jiraiya's sharp eyes missing nothing. He corrected Naruto's posture, scolded him about sloppy footwork, demanded more discipline. Between exercises, he questioned Naruto about the swirl of black in his jutsu, but Naruto deflected, saying it was just his personal style. The Sannin gave no sign of disbelief but scribbled something in a small notebook. When the sun sank behind the horizon, Jiraiya finally let him stop. "We'll keep at it tomorrow," he declared, that easy grin returning. "If you're going to face monsters, real monsters, you'll need every advantage." Naruto nodded, both encouraged and uneasy. He bowed respectfully and left, legs aching, mind swimming with the day's revelations. As he trudged home, Naruto paused beneath a street lamp. His reflection in a puddle caught his attention. Same blonde hair, same whisker marks, but a subtle edge of exhaustion around his eyes. He remembered how the sound Kunoichi's life had been in his hands for that one tense moment. The power to kill with a thought, shimmering behind his control. Am I using it, or is it using me? He wondered for what felt like the 1000th time. A familiar voice called his name, Ino, carrying a small basket in one arm. She offered a friendly wave. "Long day?" she asked, stepping closer until they both stood under the lamplight. The basket smelled of herbs and sweet buns. Maybe she'd been running errands for her family's shop. Naruto mustered a lopsided grin. "You could say that." Her gaze flicked over his stance, reading him with uncanny ease. "There's a festival tomorrow night for visiting ninja. Maybe you could come. Relax a bit." He hesitated, but her hopeful look softened him. "Sure. Why not?" She smiled brightly and dashed off, her ponytail bouncing. The warmth of that small exchange lingered, a reminder that amidst the shadows, within him and beyond, there were sparks of light in the form of friends who cared. That night brought more unsettled dreams. His father's domain loomed in silent torment. He walked a twisting path of stone, hearing the cries of lost souls. At its end, Yamraj's towering silhouette rose in hazy darkness. No thunderous voice greeted him this time, only a pointed silence that hammered at Naruto's bones, as though the god of death was waiting for him to make the next move. Crimson embers glowed in ephemeral torches, illuminating 1,000 fleeting faces in the walls. Spirits of the dead or illusions of Naruto's own fear. He shuddered awake in his bed, heart pounding. Morning found him back in the training grounds, pushing his body to the limit. He practiced water walking at Jiraiya's request, harnessing chakra more precisely than ever. The slightest waver in concentration risked letting black smoke hiss from his palms. He shut his eyes and summoned everything he had, determined not to slip. He could almost see the Toad Sage's approving nod from the shore. The day stretched on like that. Ninjutsu practice, stamina building, constant correction. By sunset, Naruto was soaked in sweat but felt a new clarity in controlling his chakra. He could sense the boundary between normal power and that darker undercurrent more keenly. He parted ways with Jiraiya, intending to head home, but remembered Ino's invitation. The festival she mentioned was already in full swing near the old marketplace. Lanterns strung across the street glowed in vibrant reds and oranges. Stalls lined the walkways selling food, trinkets, and fortunes. The air smelled of grilled fish, sweet dumplings, and spiced tea. Shinobi and civilians mingled in a rare moment of frivolity. He spotted Hinata near a stall of Lucky Charms, Tenten sampling dumplings with Lee and Neji in tow, and Ino haggling with a vendor over fragrant flowers. When the girls noticed Naruto, they waved him over, each greeting him with distinct warmth. Hinata asked shyly if he'd tried the sweet buns. Ino teased him for being late, and Tenten smirked, calling him a training maniac. Naruto's heart lightened, a pleasant contrast to the gloom he wrestled with alone. They ended up drifting through the festival together, sampling food, playing small carnival games. In those moments, laughter seemed to push back the shadows in his thoughts. Still, echoes of tension underlay the festivities. Rumors that Orochimaru had infiltrated the exam, that Danzo and the elders were keeping close watch, that certain participants harbored dangerous secrets. Once, Naruto glimpsed Moro's shape in the crowd. Face half concealed by a festival mask, eyes locked on Naruto before disappearing into the throng. A chill pricked Naruto's spine. The teacher clearly wasn't done hunting for the truth. But for a brief time, Naruto allowed himself the luxury of normalcy. He and Ino got into a mock argument over which color of charm was luckier. Hinata blushed when Naruto handed her a small plush toy from a ring toss game. Tenten exchanged training tips with him, promising a spar in the morning. Each friendly exchange anchored him to the present, away from the domain of the dead. Eventually, the festival music wound down. People began dispersing under the waxing moon. Naruto walked the kunoichi home one by one. Hinata murmured a soft thank you at her family's gate, cheeks rosy. Ino parted with a joking threat that he better not miss next time she invited him out. Tenten offered a grin, spinning a kunai in her fingers before tucking it away and heading off. Naruto watched them go, heart oddly full, as if these small connections kept him human. In the quiet aftermath, he found himself staring at the stars, perched on a bench near Konoha's perimeter. The high walls loomed, and beyond them lay the wide, perilous world. A month from now, he'd have to step into the final exam arena, with foreign villages, his own father's legacy, and Orochimaru's schemes swirling around him. His fists clenched. He couldn't let fear or confusion define him. If he truly was the son of the god of death, Then he'd prove that death could serve the cause of protecting life, not destroying it. A leaf drifted down, settling at his feet. He picked it up, rolling it between his fingers. The memory of Jiraiya's advanced techniques, maybe even discovering new jutsu to harness that swirling sphere, sparked determination in his veins. Before he returned to his apartment for the night, Naruto allowed himself a quiet vow. No matter what waited in the finals or beyond, he'd stand strong for the people who believed in him. If he had to walk between worlds, both mortal and the underworld, he'd do so on his own terms. Rising from the bench, he exhaled softly, letting the evening breeze tousle his hair. In the distance, Konoha's lights glimmered like thousands of hopeful souls, a living tapestry that deserved protection. He turned his back on the hush of darkness, guiding himself home, with the gentle thought that tomorrow would see him one step closer to mastering the power he both feared and needed. And somewhere, unseen, those robed figures from his dreams lingered at the boundary of shadows, whispering that the son of Yamraj was on the brink of awakening. A silent promise crackled in the night air, woven with the inevitability of fate and the flicker of a new dawn. A warm sun lit the Hidden Leaf village in gentle gold as Naruto sprinted across rooftops, heading for another training session with Jiraiya. He had started waking up earlier than usual, restless dreams of the underworld propelling him out of bed before dawn. Images of robed figures and molten gold eyes lingered each morning, stirring a sense of destiny he couldn't fully escape. But he forced those thoughts aside, determined to conquer his new jutsu and carry himself like any other genin preparing for the final exam. He found Jiraiya by the river, where moss-coated rocks formed small rapids. The toad sage was sitting on a broad stone, scribbling notes in a well-worn notebook. Likely, research, Naruto guessed, though he couldn't pretend to understand the man's mind. Without looking up, Jiraiya motioned for him to start water walking. Naruto waded in, focusing chakra through the soles of his feet until he balanced on the rippling current. Even this simple practice felt taxing, as though a second presence inside him kept tugging at his control. He exhaled slowly, staying above the swirling water by willpower alone. Jiraiya joined him moments later, stepping onto the water with effortless poise. Their lesson began with a barrage of corrections. Everything from posture to breath control, before moving to the swirling sphere jutsu Naruto had been honing. Each attempt flared with brilliant chakra, but just as it neared completion, a black wisp threatened to corrupt the center. Naruto would grit his teeth, forcing the darkness back, producing a jutsu that flickered on the edge of stability. "Not bad," Jiraiya remarked, arms folded. "But you're holding something back. Either you're scared or just plain stubborn. Which is it?" Naruto clenched his jaw, sweat dripping down his temple. Maybe both. He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't exactly say, "I'm the son of Yamraj and the presence you sense might be literal death." Instead, he pressed his chakra harder, channeling the swirl into a tight sphere. For a heartbeat, it glowed blue with no hint of black. Triumph swelled inside him, until the sphere wavered, flickered, and fizzled out in a sputter of steam. Jiraiya watched with keen interest. "You've got good instincts, kid, but you're wrestling with something that can't be solved by raw will alone. Ever heard the phrase, 'If you're afraid of falling, you'll never learn to fly'?" He paused, letting the words settle, then smirked. "But enough deep philosophy for now. Repeat that sequence again." They drilled well past midday, until Naruto's arms felt like lead. When Jiraiya finally called a break, Naruto collapsed onto a patch of grass by the riverbank, panting hard. The toad sage vanished into the bushes to do who knows what. Naruto took the moment to collect himself, staring at the clouds drifting overhead. He recalled the final exam bracket. Sasuke, Gaara, Neji, and a handful of others loomed as serious threats. Yet a deeper worry weighed on him. What if, in the heat of battle, that Reaper power slipped free? A soft rustle turned his head. Ino stood at the edge of the clearing, holding two small lunchboxes. She hesitated, then stepped forward. "Hey. Brought you some food. Thought you might need it." Her tone was casual, but her gaze lingered on his bruises and the exhausted way he sprawled on the ground. He mustered a grin. "You're a lifesaver." Rising to sit cross-legged, he accepted the lunchbox gratefully. She settled down beside him, opening her own meal. The midday sun warmed the grass around them. "Jiraiya's really working you to the bone," Ino observed, poking at her rice. "Is it helping?" He shrugged. "Guess we'll find out in the finals." But I feel stronger. He paused, noticing how her eyes flicked to the marks on his forearms. Scuffs, old bruises, half-healed scratches. She didn't comment directly, but concern shadowed her face. Just don't burn yourself out, she said gently. Sometimes it's okay to rely on friends, you know. A quick flush colored her cheeks, as though she realized how personal that sounded. She cleared her throat and stood up with a brisk laugh. I should go. My team's meeting soon. Don't overdo it, Naruto. He watched her dash away, a tangle of gratitude and awkward confusion dancing in his chest. In another life, maybe he'd be a normal kid returning her kindness. But this was the life he had. Training under a legendary Sannin, battling monstrous ninjas in the final exam, and suppressing the domain of death. No sense pining for a simpler existence. When Jiraiya finally returned from his research, they resumed practice until dusk. Naruto limped home under the purpling sky, mind buzzing with chakra patterns and footwork corrections. His apartment greeted him with its usual stillness. He showered, ate a quick dinner, and tumbled into bed. But as soon as sleep took him, the darkness coiled in. He found himself walking through a vast hall of carved obsidian, the flicker of greenish torches revealing row upon row of chained souls. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths open in soundless wails. An invisible wind stirred the rotting stench of fear. At the far end of the hall, a colossal figure robed in swirling black looked down at him. Yamraj. His father's aura pulsed like a heartbeat, each wave a command that pressed on Naruto's mind. You walk the path of mortal struggle, the towering god intoned, voice resonant with sorrow and threat. But your true nature calls. Will you deny me forever, Naruto? Naruto's throat felt tight, words dead on his tongue. He turned away from Yamraj's gold ember eyes, stumbling back toward the darkness. The dream collapsed around him, and he shot awake, sweat cold on his spine. Outside, the moon glowed through the curtains, indifferent to his silent turmoil. The next day found him in the training grounds again, but not with Jiraiya. This time, Tenten had offered a spar. She warmed up with an array of weapon scrolls, each technique precise. Naruto admired the dedication in her every motion, the slight glimmer of excitement in her eyes when she faced a worthy opponent. They circled each other on the grass, trading cautious jutsu. She unleashed a flurry of kunai from a seal on her forearm. He dodged with a quick roll, flicking two shuriken back. Metal clashed midair, sparks dancing. At one point, Tenten switched tactics and lunged with a short spear. Naruto deflected it, but the force behind her strike told him she was holding nothing back. He answered with a rush of clones, weaving between them to confuse her. She pivoted, scattering the illusions with a precisely placed kunai barrage. One clone survived, surprising her from behind, but she whirled just in time, pressing a blade to the clone's throat. Poof! It vanished in smoke. Before Naruto could capitalize, Tenten hurled an explosive tag onto the ground, forcing him to leap away in a swirl of debris. Her laughter rang out, exhilarant. He grinned. She was good, no doubt about it, and the intensity of real combat practice sharpened both their skills. Only once or twice did he feel the black presence stir, an urge to end the spar with a single glare. Each time, he crushed it, determined not to let a friendly match turn lethal. When they finished, both panting and drenched in sweat, Tenten tossed him a water bottle. If that's how you fight in the finals, you'll do well, she teased, wiping her brow. But you're missing something. A finishing move, maybe. You hold back right at the end. He chewed his lip, remembering how often he balked at final strikes, whether against the sound kunoichi or in this practice. Finishing moves can be messy, he said, forcing a half smile. I guess I'd rather find another way. Sometimes, there isn't another way. Her gaze flickered with an odd seriousness. Just be ready if your opponent won't give you that mercy. He nodded. The moment felt heavier than he liked, so he cracked a joke about needing ramen. Tenten grinned, and they parted with a friendly wave, though her advice hung in the back of his mind. What if the final exam forced him to choose between losing or tapping into Yamraj's powers? Meanwhile, Sasuke trained in seclusion, no surprise. Rumors suggested Kakashi had him locked away to deal with the cursed seal Orochimaru left behind. Sakura spent hours at the hospital, studying under medical nin to support her team, though Naruto often noticed her lost in thought, likely worrying about Sasuke. Across the village, Ino honed her clan's mind-based jutsu, while Hinata sparred under the watchful eyes of the Hyuga elders, building confidence day by day. Everyone advanced at their own pace, forging new heights for the final test. Orochimaru's name echoed in quiet corners. Glimpses of a sinister figure stirring unrest, some said. But the Sannin never showed himself openly. Naruto stayed alert, half expecting a confrontation every time he sensed a sinister aura. Instead, another presence loomed on the periphery. Moro, the academy teacher. Naruto spotted him near training fields, in dim corridors, always at a distance. Once, Naruto confronted him outright. He demanded to know why Moro was stalking him. The teacher's answer was a cryptic murmur. "You stand at a crossroads of mortal life and the netherworld, Uzumaki. I simply wait to see which path you choose." Nothing more. No open hostility, no immediate threat. Yet the conversation left Naruto's heart pounding. Did Moro suspect the entire truth, or was he just a curious observer? If word of Naruto's lineage reached the village elders, it could spark fear, condemnation, even an attempt to seal or control him. The idea of being locked away, used as a living weapon, haunted him. Days trickled into weeks. The final exam date crept closer. Naruto spent his nights restless, wandering the edges of the village or meditating by lamplight in his cramped apartment. Occasionally, Ino or Hinata visited, offering support in their own ways. Ino with brash encouragement, Hinata with gentle concern. Tenten kept her distance, training intensely to master new weapons, though she sent Naruto brief, determined smiles when their paths crossed. Their presence eased his isolation. He never breathed a word about the nightly dreams of Yamraj's domain, but he found comfort in the knowledge that, if nothing else, these three believed in him for who he was now. At last, the day of the finals dawned, bright and clear. Konoha's grand stadium loomed like a fortress against the sky. Crowds gathered early, villagers, visiting ninja, feudal lords, and even the cage perched in the stands. The tension was palpable, each finalist feeling the weight of so many watching eyes. Naruto entered through a gate, heart-pounding, mind ablaze with all Jiraiya's lessons. He reminded himself not to rely on anything but skill, strategy, and the raw grit he'd cultivated. He'd come this far without succumbing to the Reaper's call, and he intended to finish the same way. In the waiting area, Sasuke was conspicuously absent, fueling whispers about him forfeiting. Gaara stood alone in a dark corner, arms folded, eyes cold. Neji meditated quietly, face serene yet taut with confidence. Hinata offered Naruto a shy wave from across the corridor, though her match was set against a cunning grass nin. Ino waited with Shikamaru, sending Naruto a quick grin. Tenten prepared her scrolls, a determined furrow on her brow. Before the exam started, the Hokage gave a short speech. He welcomed the guests, praised the young shinobi, and explained that the finals would proceed in single elimination matches. The bracket displayed on a massive board. Naruto's name flashed beside one from the Cloud Village, a tall genin with lightning-infused fists. Adrenaline coursed through Naruto at the sight. He had to outthink that crackling speed. The proctor called the first fight, and a hush fell. Two finalists descended into the ring. Naruto stood with the others on a raised platform, tension coiling in his gut. This was it. The stage he'd worked so hard to reach, the crucible that would reveal who truly deserved the rank of Chunin. The crowd's roar pressed against his ears. High above, an unseen presence seemed to watch more closely than any mortal. Naruto exhaled, remembering Yamraj's words in his dream. Would the god of death be satisfied if Naruto unleashed his full inheritance, or was there something else the ancient entity expected of him? He tried to shake off the feeling. A normal fight. He just needed a normal fight. If he could triumph under his own power, maybe the world wouldn't see him as a monster. And maybe, just maybe, he could prove it to himself, too. The first match concluded with a burst of ninjutsu, one finalist dropping from sheer exhaustion while the victor knelt, gasping. Applause thundered from the stands. The proctor stepped forward, glanced at the bracket screen, then called the next contenders. Naruto Uzumaki and Koji of the Cloud. Report to the arena. Heart-pounding, Naruto made his way to the center. Across from him, Koji stretched his arms, arcs of static dancing around his forearms. Sparks snapped through the dusty air. The crowd hushed in anticipation. Somewhere above, Ino and Tenten watched anxiously. Hinata pressed her hands together, and Jiraiya likely observed with a silent measure of pride. Naruto squared his shoulders, reminding himself of every bit of training that led here. No illusions of fatherly might, no kill with a thought power. Just jutsu, grit, and unwavering will. The proctor's voice rang out, echoing off the stadium walls. Begin. Koji wasted no time, lunging in a blur of lightning speed. Naruto barely evaded, wind ruffling his hair as Koji's charged fist passed by inches. He responded with a flurry of kunai, forcing Koji to dodge. Sparks flared, deflecting steel with sizzling cracks. The audience leaned forward, enthralled by their speed. Naruto formed two shadow clones, each dashing wide to flank Koji. The Cloud Genin smirked and blasted an arc of lightning at one clone, dispersing it with a sharp hiss. The second clone managed to close in, but Koji spun, delivering a shocking elbow that sent it flying into the dirt. It vanished in a puff of smoke. Naruto seized the opening, launching forward with a swirling sphere in his hand. This time, bright blue, unblemished by black flickers. Koji's eyes widened, forced to channel lightning into his palms, bracing for impact. They clashed in a brilliant shockwave. Energy exploded across the arena floor, forcing spectators to shield their eyes. At the edges of Naruto's consciousness, a cold voice whispered, "End him, use it, you'll win." He gritted his teeth, forcing that voice into silence, letting only his raw chakra feed the technique. Koji buckled first, skidding backward, lightning dancing erratically around his arms. Naruto pressed forward, determined to finish this with skill, not death. Yet Koji wasn't done. In a desperate move, he shiong energy that tore up chunks of stone. Naruto leapt above the debris, pivoted midair to hurl a trio of kunai. Two missed. One lodged in Koji's shoulder, drawing a snarl of pain. The Cloud Genin tried to retaliate, but his chakra sputtered, lightning arcs fading. Naruto landed, kneeling behind him in a fluid motion. A kunai pressed to Koji's back. A hush fell across the stadium, every spectator leaning in. Naruto's breath came fast, heart-pounding. This was the moment Tenten had warned about, the finishing move. He didn't have to kill Koji, just end the fight. Slowly, Koji raised his hands, defeat creasing his features. Naruto exhaled in relief and yanked his kunai away, stepping back. The proctor nodded, raising an arm to declare Naruto the victor. Applause erupted, accompanied by a few uneasy murmurs from those who knew of his rumored deadly abilities. Naruto slumped, a surge of relief washing through him. He'd done it. He'd defeated a strong opponent without letting his father's domain overshadow him. Above, he glimpsed Jiraiya's proud grin and Kakashi's subtle nod. In the stands, Hinata clapped gently, Ino cheered enthusiastically, and Tenten offered a small, approving salute. Even Sasuke, wherever he was, might have been forced to acknowledge Naruto's growth. But in the corner of Naruto's eye, something stirred. A figure on a distant balcony. Moro, arms folded, gazed down at him with an unreadable stare, as though disappointed Naruto hadn't unleashed more. A chill prickled Naruto's skin, reminding him that not everyone in Konoha was content to see him remain merely human. Shaking off that discomfort, he turned and followed the proctor's gesture, walking back to the platform to watch the remaining matches. One step down, more to come. He might still face Gaara or Sasuke, or perhaps someone else equally formidable in the next rounds. And overshadowing it all, the tension of Orochimaru's hidden presence gnawed at the edges of Konoha's celebratory air. Yet for now, Naruto stood tall in front of thousands, battered and triumphant, a living testament to the will to fight without succumbing to the monstrous power tethered to his soul. He cast one last glance at the sky, wondering if Yamraj looked on from some unseen vantage in the underworld. "I choose my own path," Naruto thought fiercely, stepping away to prepare for whatever the final exam, and the lurking threats, would bring. Above, the crowd roared for the next match, oblivious to the delicate line he walked between mortal valor and the silent call of death. The crowd's energy crackled through the stadium, a heady mix of roaring excitement and razor-edged tension. Naruto stood on the stone platform alongside the other victors, adrenaline still thrumming in his limbs from his recent match. He risked a glance across the ring where Koji had been helped off by medics, wincing at the bruises snaking up his lightning-scorched arms. Relief clashed with guilt in Naruto's chest. He'd beaten Koji without turning to the dreadful power that lurked in his blood. His eyes wandered upward, taking in the mass of spectators crammed into the stands. Civilians cheered for the next fight, while feudal lords and visiting shinobi clan heads watched with measured interest. The Hokage presided over it all, perched in his private box beneath swaying banners. An undercurrent of unease rippled through Naruto, as though eyes far beyond these crowds observed him. Orochimaru? Or perhaps his father's gaze from the underworld? He couldn't tell which haunted him more. The proctor, a lean, sharp-eyed man, scanned a list. Tenten versus Menka of the Mist. He called, voice echoing over the excited hum of the audience. Tenten, standing near the far edge of the platform, inhaled deeply before nodding to Naruto in passing. She leapt down into the arena, lithe and focused. Her opponent, a sullen mist nin with a massive collapsible staff, hopped to meet her. A hush spread as they sized each other up. When the fight began, Tenten unleashed a dazzling array of weapon scrolls, summoning chains, spiked balls, and sleek knives. Each sword with startling accuracy. Menka responded by spinning his staff in a defensive blur, water chakras swirling around him to parry or absorb the onslaught. The clash of steel on watery barriers rang out, leaving watchers enthralled. From his vantage, Naruto felt a prick of pride. Tenten had trained ferociously, and it showed in every razor-sharp throw. Yet Menka was no pushover. With a rapid twist, he pushed Tenten onto the defensive, conjuring water bullets from the tip of his staff. She dodged most, taking one glancing hit to the shoulder. Grimacing, she switched tactics. A wide, red scroll unfurled around her, unleashing a torrent of kunai that fanned out like a deadly storm. Menka's staff spun again, but this time Tenten wove in among her own blades, drawing in close. In a burst of skill, she jammed a pointed dagger against his ribs. The clang of metal ceased. A pause stretched, then Menka let his staff drop. The proctor announced Tenten's victory. Cheering erupted, and Naruto joined in, a grin tugging at his mouth. Over on another platform, Ino hollered Tenten's name, while Hinata clapped with a shy smile. Tenten, panting, offered the audience a respectful bow. She looked up, caught Naruto's eye, and shot him a triumphant nod before following the proctor out. More matches churned on. Shikamaru faced a sly kunoichi from the grass, narrowly winning when he outmaneuvered her illusions with his shadow possession. Hinata bravely battled a stone nin who relied on petrifying genjutsu. Though she struggled, her Byakugan gave her the edge to strike at his chakra points. She collapsed at the end, exhausted but victorious. And Naruto couldn't help feeling a surge of admiration at how far she'd come from that timid academy student. Between bouts, the stadium crews cleared debris and patched up scorched or shattered floors. The sun inched higher, heat pulsing in waves across the stands. Naruto found a sliver of shade along the viewing platform, letting his heart steady. He glimpsed Jiraiya, leaning on a railing, chewing on a strip of dried meat, outwardly unconcerned but clearly pleased at Naruto's performance. Kakashi, masked and inscrutable, stood near the Hokage's section, making occasional notes. And then there was Moro, drifting along the upper tier. Their eyes met. A faint chill traced Naruto's spine. The teacher looked disappointed, as if he still expected some monstrous revelation. Suddenly, murmurs rose as the proctor called, Sasuke Uchiha, and Gaara of the Sand. A sudden hush swept the arena. Many had whispered Sasuke might not show. Even the Hokage leaned forward in his seat, interest piqued. Then, in a flurry of leaves, Sasuke appeared on the field, black shirt rustling in the wind. Across from him, Gaara stood in eerie stillness, arms crossed, gourd strapped to his back. Naruto's pulse quickened. This might be the most perilous match yet. They exchanged no words. The proctor gave a nod, and Gaara's sand rippled at his feet, rising in a coiling mass. Sasuke lunged, lightning-charged fist at the ready. For an instant, the two collided in a swirl of dust and sparks. The resulting impact drew gasps from the crowd. Gaara's sand shield buckled under Sasuke's punch but didn't fully break. With a hiss, Gaara flung a wave of grit at Sasuke's legs, forcing him to leap. Their exchange became a dance of lethal precision. Sand whips lashing out, Sasuke retaliating with Chidori, each testing the other's limits. Naruto watched intently, knuckles white on the balcony railing. Sasuke's speed had improved. He slipped in and out of Gaara's defenses, leaving cracks in the sand shield. Blood trickled from Gaara's temple, expression twisting with something close to panic and fury. Sand bubbled at his feet, an ominous sign of the One-Tail's influence. The air vibrated with malevolent chakra. Even from a distance, Naruto felt it. A pulsing darkness hungry for destruction, not so different throated his own veins. Sasuke braced to drive another Chidori home, lightning screeching in his palm. Gaara's face twisted. He let out a strangled growl, sand surging, then suddenly clutched his head as if fighting an internal demon. In a flash, a monstrous, half-formed limb of sand erupted from his gourd, swiping at Sasuke. The Uchiha barely managed to dodge, leaving shards of rock scattered across the arena. A collective gasp rippled through the stadium. Then everything happened at once. An abrupt explosion rocked the far walls. Smoke billowed, screams rising. Feather-light illusions started settling over the crowd. Genjutsu. Shinobi in disguised cloaks, scattered among the spectators, threw off their cloaks to reveal foreign gear. Invasion. Pandemonium erupted. Chunin and Jonin around the stadium leapt into action, trying to shield the civilians. The Hokage shot upright in alarm, and from behind him, the Kazekage tore away his robes, revealing Orochimaru's serpentine grin. The snake Sannin grabbed the Hokage in a vice-like hold, vanishing onto the rooftop with a flicker of movement too fast for most eyes to track. Naruto's stomach lurched. Orochimaru had infiltrated the entire exam, exactly as the rumors hinted. Panicked spectators stampeded, thunderous footsteps echoing as many tried to flee. Meanwhile, Gaara reeled on the arena floor, snarling like a caged beast, and Sasuke turned to see hidden sand and sound shinobi pouring in from the collapsed wall. Another explosion rattled the stands. Shinobi illusions shimmered, attacking leaf shinobi from all sides. Naruto whirled, searching for any sign of Jiraiya, Kakashi, or his friends. Chaos made it impossible to see clearly. Screams and battle cries melded into a nightmarish blur. A harsh voice crackled through the air. Neutralize the Konoha shinobi. Execute the plan. A wave of smaller explosions flared, sending debris cascading onto the arena floor. He spotted Hinata and Tenten battling a squad of masked assailants near a broken column, the girls holding their ground despite the odds. Ino and Shikamaru were on higher ground, each flinging their clan's jutsu to hold off a group of sound nin. Naruto's every nerve blazed with a single purpose. Protect them all. Leaping from the balcony, he landed amidst swirling dust. One masked attacker lunged, blade gleaming. Naruto summoned a pair of clones, disarming the foe in 2 swift moves. Another rushed in from behind, only to catch a brutal spinning kick that launched him into a crumbled section of stone. Each strike drew on Naruto's refined chakra control, still the normal kind, he reminded himself. No letting the Reaper in. But the scale of violence around him was terrifying. Shinobi fell on every side, and some died with only a silent choke or strangled scream. The air thickened with fear and the metallic scent of blood. Naruto's heart hammered. The warlike chaos threatened to tear away his last shred of restraint. Don't you dare, he told himself, forcing down that kill with a thought instinct that coiled at the edge of his mind. A deafening roar snapped his attention to the center of the arena. Gaara, half transformed, slammed a monstrous sand claw into a group of leaf shinobi, sending them sprawling. Sasuke clashed with him again, the crackle of lightning overshadowed by Gaara's unhinged rage. Alarm shot through Naruto. If Gaara went full Shukaku, the entire stadium could be buried under sand. Naruto sprinted forward. He glimpsed Tenten grappling an enemy down, a slash on her arm. Ino and Shikamaru backed each other up, luring foes into shadow traps. Hinata pressed a bloodied palm to her side, but still she fought, white eyes fierce. They're surviving, Naruto reassured himself, though worry gnawed at him. Across the stands, he saw glimpses of Jiraiya clashing with large summon creatures. They'll handle themselves, Sasuke needs help. He charged into the dust-choked ring, weaving around rubble. Sasuke hammered Gaara again with Chidori, forcing howls of pain from the raging sand nin. Cracks splintered across Gaara's sand armor, revealing glimpses of monstrous flesh beneath. A swirl of dark chakra burst out, nearly suffocating Sasuke with vile pressure. The Uchiha staggered, pinned by sheer force. Naruto thrust himself between them, forming his swirling sphere. He slammed it into Gaara's reaching sand limb, partially dispersing it in a gritty explosion. Sand swirled around them like a storm. Gaara's eyes flickered with madness, voice twisted by the demon inside. All of you are prey. Naruto recalled the half-formed monster he'd witnessed in the forest. This was far worse. Another roaring sandclaw tore free, swiping at him. He ducked, staggering sideways, trying not to let the dust blind him. Sasuke coughed, clutching his cursed mark, which flared with an ominous black pattern across his skin. Overhead, enormous barriers of purple flame materialized as Orochimaru's ritual took shape on the rooftop. The Hokage's silhouette faced him, locked in a fearsome stalemate. More explosions rumbled across the village, indicating the invasion had extended far beyond the stadium. Naruto squared off against Gaara, ignoring the swirling panic around him. Civilians fled, some pinned by fallen debris. Shinobi engaged in smaller skirmishes near collapsed arches. The entire place felt like a war zone. Gaara's breath rasped, half human, half monster. Naruto formed more clones, each rushing in with kunai, trying to shred the sand enough for Sasuke to catch his breath. A savage bellow tore from Gaara's chest. A tidal wave of sand crashed outward, flattening many clones and sending Naruto tumbling. Sasuke slumped to his knees, cursed mark searing across his arm. He looked at Naruto, sharing a grim nod. They had to end this before Gaara fully unleashed Shukaku. Naruto launched himself forward again, weaving a seal. Summoning Jiraiya's training to mind, he channeled chakra into his palm. A swirl of energy coalesced, still a pure, bright blue, though he felt flickers of black crawling at the edges. He refused to let it taint him. Racing up a twisting sand pillar that Gaara had conjured, he aimed directly for Gaara's chest, urging Sasuke to strike simultaneously. The collision of lightning-laced Chidori and Naruto's swirling orb hammered Gaara in a double impact. A guttural shriek tore the air. Cracks splintered the demon-like shell around Gaara. For a breath, Naruto thought they'd succeeded. Then a terrifying wave of sand crashed down from above, blindly thrashing in all directions. Naruto braced for impact. He had no time to dodge. In a desperate move, the cold power in his blood flared, self-preservation overriding logic. He sensed the chain of life within Gaara's rampaging chakra, the fragile thread that bound him to flesh and existence. If Naruto pulled on that thread, he could end Gaara now. No, he bit back a roar, forcibly redirecting his chakra into a standard shield, letting the swirling sphere's energy disperse the lethal aura. The wave of sand smashed him against a fragment of the stadium wall, driving the air from his lungs. Dazed, he blinked dust from his eyes, glimpsing Sasuke pinned on the opposite side. Gaara stumbled a few steps, twisted in pain, half his monstrous form crumbling. He glared at Naruto, uncertain rage in his eyes. Then, with a rasping hiss, he bolted, fleeing in a wild, half-crazed dash through the stadium's ruined exit. His siblings, Temari and Kankuro, rushed after him. Naruto gasped for breath, struggling upright. Sasuke coughed, leaning on a shattered column. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Gaara was heading deeper into the village, still possessed by Shukaku's wrath. If he transformed fully in the heart of Konoha, the destruction would be unimaginable. Nearby, Tenten and Hinata dispatched the last of the sound nin in their section, each wounded but resolute. Ino hurried down from the stands, hair disheveled, relief washing her face upon seeing Naruto still standing. Shikamaru joined them, shaking his head at the outer wall of the arena, black smoke curling into the sky. Naruto swallowed. I have to stop Gaara, he said hoarsely. Sasuke managed a weak nod. We do this together, if he taps into Shukaku fully. The weight of what might happen pressed like a stone on Naruto's heart. Right. Before they could move, more detonation blasts rattled the area. The ground shuddered underfoot. In the distance, they heard monstrous roars. Likely giant summons. Ninja dashed frantically across rooftops. Civilians huddled in broken alleyways. Up above, Orochimaru's barrier flared again with sinister power. A sickening pit churned in Naruto's stomach, feeling the staggering number of lives in jeopardy. Tenten, grimacing from her injuries, stepped forward. We can hold any leftover invaders here. You two, go after Gaara. You're the only ones who fought him up close. Hinata clutched her side, determination burning despite her trembling. "We'll protect the stadium. Please, stop him." Ino nodded in agreement, though her eyes flicked with worry at letting Naruto go headlong into danger. "And don't get yourself killed," she muttered, voice wobbling. Naruto grabbed her shoulder gently, mustering a small, fierce smile. "Promise." Then he turned, beckoning Sasuke to follow, and they sprinted out of the crumbling arena. Debris and swirling dust followed them as they cut through alleyways, searching for any sign of Gaara's rampage. They leapt over collapsed roofs, ran past battered shops and vacant courtyards. By now, the village filled with the echoes of battle. Kunai clashes, screams, and terrifying roars from summoned creatures. Plumes of smoke marred the horizon. Naruto forced himself onward. The Reaper's call thrummed at the base of his skull. He felt that horrifying, familiar invitation. "Use me. End them all." Every dying moment in the streets magnified the temptation. But he grit his teeth, refusing to bring about more fear and destruction. If he had to fight a Biju-level threat, he'd do it with his own power or not at all. Finally, they spotted Gaara bounding across a rooftop, scattering tiles in his wake. He was hunched over, the right side of his body warped into a monstrous sand arm. Sasuke and Naruto chased him out of the village proper, into the edge of the forest beyond Konoha's walls. Gaara crashed through the tree line, snarling like a wounded animal, leaving snapped branches and deep claw marks in the soil. Sasuke and Naruto exchanged a quick glance. Both were exhausted. Sasuke's curse mark pulsed ominously, and Naruto's chakra reserves felt dangerously low. But they had no choice. Gaara paused in a small clearing, whirling to face them with a sound caught between a scream and a growl. You've ruined my purpose," Gaara rasped, voice twisted. "I must kill." Sand erupted, forming a grotesque partial Shukaku face across Gaara's torso. Sasuke mustered Chidori again, lightning shrieking around his arm. Naruto steadied himself, summoning a swirl of chakra at his palms. Another wave of mania tore through Gaara, and an impossibly large sand tail formed behind him, smashing the ground in a thunderous impact. Sasuke leapt first, aiming a thrust at Gaara's midsection. Sand rushed to block, splintering under the Chidori's crackling energy. Naruto seized the opening, launching forward to strike Gaara's flank, swirling sphere clutched tightly. Gaara roared, twisting to slash at Naruto with the tail. Naruto dove beneath it, skidding across churned earth. Their combined effort nearly broke Gaara's monstrous shell. Pieces of sand armor flaked off, revealing pale, pained skin. Gaara bared his teeth, hatred and confusion tangled in his eyes. Another explosion of sand forced Sasuke to withdraw, pinned behind a half-collapsed tree. Naruto pressed onward, heart-hammering. Every sense screamed that Gaara was more demon than human now. "I can't kill him," Naruto thought fiercely, "but I have to stop him." With a sharp exhale, he poured the last of his normal chakra into a final swirling sphere. He saw black wisps creeping in at the edges, his father's domain prowling for a chance. "Not now," he raged inwardly. "I can do this." Gaara lunged. Naruto met him mid-strike, slamming the orb directly against Gaara's chest. A shockwave tore across the clearing, uprooting trees in a vicious arc. Gaara coughed up blood, sand fracturing around him like shattered glass. Sasuke blasted him from behind with a half-formed Chidori, compounding the strike. The monstrous shell collapsed, leaving Gaara splayed on the ground, breath ragged. His transformation receded in grotesque lumps of sand that melted away. For a frantic moment, Naruto wondered if they'd killed him by accident. But Gaara's eyes flickered open, wide with shock. A lull descended, just harsh breathing and swirling dust motes in the sunlight. Naruto staggered, knees buckling. He tumbled onto his back, heart pounding so violently he tasted blood in his throat. Sasuke dropped to one knee, the cursed mark receding in twisted patterns on his neck. Gaara just lay there, trembling, tears gathering in his eyes. "You fight to protect others," Gaara rasped, voice cracking. "I was taught only to love myself." Naruto forced himself upright, crawling closer. He understood too well the agony of loneliness, the darkness that came from isolation and fear. Something in Gaara's broken stare struck a chord of compassion in him. They weren't so different, haunted by monstrous forces within. Before either could speak, faint booms echoed in the distance. Konoha still burned, battles raging. The worst of the invasion might have moved elsewhere, but the threat wasn't over. Sasuke pushed himself up, stumbling forward. "We need to get back," he croaked. "Help the others, or see how we can stop Orochimaru." Naruto nodded, glancing once more at Gaara. The Sand Nin, shock flooding his expression, turned away. Temari and Kankuro emerged from the shadows, battered and alarmed. They gathered Gaara in uncertain silence. Naruto and Sasuke observed an unspoken truce. This clash was over. There was no strength left in either side to continue. The moment weighed heavy with regret and relief. Naruto and Sasuke shared a final look, then limped away, heading back toward the village. Leaves rattled overhead in a sudden gust. For a fleeting heartbeat, Naruto sensed that same robed presence from his dreams, as though Yamraj watched the confrontation and withdrew. Not today, Naruto thought, swallowing hard. They reached the outskirts of Konoha as the sun hung low. Smoke still curled from shattered rooftops, but Leaf forces seemed to have gained the upper hand. Reinforcements from the clan district poured in, pushing back or capturing invading ninja. Summons lingered here and there, giant toads, serpents, and a monstrous multi-headed canine that Jiraiya and other Jonin were forcing into retreat. A collective hush fell through the city as the barrier around the stadium vanished in a burst of light. On a distant rooftop, the Hokage's silhouette stood, staff in hand, Orochimaru opposite him. An agonized chorus of swirling souls flickered above, the aftermath of a reaper-like sealing jutsu. Suddenly, Orochimaru reeled back, letting out a furious shriek. The Hokage sagged to his knees. Even from so far away, Naruto felt the soul-rending finality of the technique. Moments later, Orochimaru yanked himself free, leaping backward with unnatural grace. Figures in sound masks appeared, whisking him away amid a swirl of smoke. The Hokage collapsed, staff clattering against broken tiles. Chunin and Enbu scrambled to reach him. A hush settled over the entire village. Naruto's heart twisted. He used a deadly seal, he realized, is the Hokage. Sasuke exhaled shakily. "We should go," he murmured. They trudged through rubble-strewn streets, passing exhausted Leaf shinobi and medics racing to rescue trapped civilians. Relief mingled with sorrow in every face. Houses still smoldered, blood stained the sidewalks. The Kostoyars was steep. Naruto's mind buzzed with the knowledge that Orochimaru had escaped, and now the village might have lost its leader. At last, they reached the stadium remnants. Tenten, Hinata, Ino, and Shikamaru were there, along with other survivors. Wounded but alive. Expressions brightened upon seeing Naruto and Sasuke return, battered yet standing. Hinata hurried over, tears in her eyes, relief washing her face. Tenten gave Naruto a long, hard stare, her worry tempered by a fierce pride that he'd made it back. Ino exhaled sharply, trembling with pent-up fear. No words needed to pass between them. They knew the exam was over, overshadowed by a war that had battered their home. Jiraiya arrived moments later, grimy with soot and cuts, but alive. He spared a quick nod, scanning Naruto and Sasuke for major injuries. Kakashi soon joined, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his side. They exchanged grave looks. Everyone understood the Sandaime Hokage might be dying or already gone. A lingering hush spread. Dusk settled, turning the smoke-laden sky into a murky orange. Soldiers and medical nin dashed through the wreckage. People embraced, sobbed, or stood numb with shock. This was no glorious victory. It was survival, marred by dreadful loss. Naruto sank against a broken pillar, letting the weight of the day's carnage crush him. He felt Tenten's hand on his shoulder, Ino hovering close, Hinata standing nearby, unsure whether to approach. Their presence grounded him a bit, soothed the tremble in his fingers. Sasuke leaned on a crumbled statue, gazing at the ruined stadium with hollow eyes. Somewhere beyond mortal sight, Naruto felt a faint echo of dark satisfaction, as if Yamraj's realm had gorged on the souls claimed in this invasion. He swallowed back bile, determined not to give in to despair. Konoha had survived. Orochimaru was gone, if only for now. Gaara hadn't become a complete monster. There was still hope in that outcome, even if it felt fragile. Night fell slowly, blanketing the wounded village in a sorrowful hush. Fires were extinguished. Medics set up makeshift tents to treat the injured. The final matches of the Chunin exam no longer mattered. The exam itself was rendered moot by the scale of Orochimaru's assault. Nobody was crowning a champion tonight. Instead, the village gathered its losses, tended its wounded, and steeled itself for an uncertain future. Naruto looked at his friends, Tenten, Ino, Hinata. Support shining in their eyes. He found enough breath to manage a tired smile. Tomorrow, they'd face the aftermath. They'd learn whether their Hokage was truly gone. They'd discover what it meant for Konoha to stand without its guiding pillar. And Naruto, caught in the swirl of tragedy, would have to confront the secrets of his bloodline more fiercely than ever, lest the next catastrophe see him crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. For now, the hush of night settled on the ruins, and the battered defenders of the Hidden Leaf village held each other up in the gloom. Even amid the stench of blood and ashes, life remained. They had fought, they had survived, and the will of fire still burned, if only just enough to keep the darkness at bay. Night hung over Konoha like a heavy curtain of grief. Faint lanterns glowed in broken streets, illuminating medics carrying wounded shinobi to makeshift tents. Cinders still drifted on the wind, reminders of the fires that had raged just hours before. The invasion was over, but its cost lay etched into the rubble, the faces of the injured, and a sorrow that pressed on every soul. Naruto wandered through the devastated marketplace, flanked by Tenten and Ino, each bearing minor wounds but still on their feet. Hinata had gone to aid other Hyuga in locating survivors. Shikamaru and Choji were helping with evacuation efforts for collapsed buildings. Kakashi and Jiraiya had vanished into the higher levels of the village, presumably to coordinate defense and search for any hidden threats. Every so often, Naruto glimpsed a form lying still beneath torn sheets, another casualty. The sight stabbed at him. He kept replaying the moment he'd sensed that twisted glee from Yamraj's domain, feeding on the souls lost in this battle. He felt tainted by the knowledge that his father's power thrived on death, even if Naruto wanted no part of it. Tenten's voice broke his reverie. Naruto, the hospital needs more bandages. You and Ino see if you can find any supplies in the wreckage. I'll go check the lower district. She spoke softly, exhaustion clear in her eyes. He and Ino nodded. Tenten squeezed Naruto's shoulder, just for a moment, then limped off, her arm wrapped where a blade had grazed her. Ino gently steered Naruto down a side street, stepping around broken timbers and craters blown into the ground. You okay? She asked, eyes darting over him. You're not hurt worse than you look? He hesitated, scanning his own scuffed arms and torn clothes. Physically, he felt battered but not broken. Mentally, he was raw. He forced a smile. I'm still standing. That counts for something. The chaos of the destroyed district provided no quick solutions. Most shops were ruined, their interiors scorched or rubble-strewn. They managed to salvage a few rolls of cloth, some gauze, antiseptic, whatever hadn't been destroyed by explosions. Loading them into a satchel, they set off back toward the hospital, passing civilians huddled in corners. Ino knelt to offer a kind word or scraps of food to anyone who looked too frightened to move. Naruto couldn't help admiring how naturally she comforted others. Near the hospital, they saw a procession of leaf shinobi gently carrying a body covered by a white cloth. Blood dripped from the edges, soaking into the linen. Naruto swallowed, throat tight. This was the reality of war, no matter how much he'd fought. Everywhere, grief weighed on the survivors. Suddenly, an Anbu with a hawk mask dashed up, out of breath. Ino Yamanaka? Naruto Uzumaki? Hokage Tower, immediately. Why? Ino asked, brow knitting. Council's convening. Go. The masked shinobi vanished just as quickly, leaving them stunned. They exchanged uneasy glances, then hurried to drop off the supplies at a medical tent before racing through the dark streets toward the damaged Hokage Tower. It stood battered but upright, windows shattered, smoke stains on its walls. Inside, a handful of grim-faced elders had gathered with Senior Jonin. Danzo leaned heavily on a cane, his bandaged face giving him a severe appearance. Homura and Kaharu, the other senior advisors, stood by him, lips pressed tight. Naruto spotted Kakashi, Jiraiya, and Moro in the chamber. Moro's presence made the hairs on Naruto's neck prickle. The teacher's expression was as inscrutable as ever, somehow both watchful and cold. The moment Naruto and Ino arrived, Danzo's gaze settled on them with an unsettling intensity. He rapped his cane once. Uzumaki. Yamanaka. This meeting concerns the future of Konoha in the wake of Lord Hokage's demise. A numb dread twisted Naruto's gut. He'd heard rumors, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like a blow. The third Hokage. Dead. The silence in the room weighed like iron. Jiraiya's face was grave, a flicker of regret in his eyes. Kakashi closed his visible eye for a moment, as if steeling himself. Homura cleared his throat. As we regroup, we must also consider the chain of command. The village needs a Hokage. One who can handle threats like Orochimaru. And any other sources of dark power lurking in Konoha. He paused, gaze flicking to Naruto. Naruto's pulse hammered. Did they already suspect his lineage? He glanced at Moro, catching the faint trace of a smile tugging at the teacher's lips. Like a predator awaiting its moment. Danzo stepped forward. Let it be known that I will handle immediate security measures. The fire daimyo will be approached to confirm the next Hokage. In the meantime, we must ensure that unique threats are contained. Jiraiya folded his arms. I know something to say about Naruto, say it. That boy, Danzo began, one hand gripping his cane, has already displayed an uncanny ability to end life with minimal effort. The boar incident, the rumors from the Chunin exams, he cannot be allowed to roam unchecked. Kakashi stiffened. Naruto saved countless lives today. Are you suggesting we imprison him? Moro stepped forward, voice low and calm. We've seen his potential. He is dangerous, but perhaps the solution is not imprisonment. Perhaps a specialized unit. Training. Monitoring. Anger flared in Naruto's chest. I'm no one's experiment, he snapped, stepping forward before he could stop himself. Ino grabbed his sleeve, worried. A charged silence. Danzo studied Naruto's defiant stance with narrowed eyes. The village's safety is paramount. We cannot ignore what happened today, or what might happen if his powers exceed his control. Jiraiya exhaled sharply, anger showing in his tense jaw. If you insist on meddling with him, you'll have to go through me first. Kakashi said nothing, but he placed a firm hand on Naruto's shoulder, an unspoken reassurance. Naruto's heart pounded so loud he could scarcely hear. He half expected them to lunge, to drag him off to some root facility. Enough, another voice interrupted from the doorway. Shikaku Nara, father to Shikamaru, stepped inside with two other Jonin. He gave a slight bow to the elders. There's more pressing business than scapegoating a hero who fought to protect us. Orochimaru escaped, and the sand remains in turmoil. We have alliances to salvage, wounded to treat, and a funeral to plan. Danzo's jaw twitched, but he yielded with a grunt. Homura and Kaharu exchanged uneasy looks before Homura finally said, we will revisit this issue soon. For now, everyone return to your duties. Konoha needs order. The meeting broke. Danzo swept out, cane tapping against the floor, flanked by rude operatives. Moro lingered a moment, giving Naruto a thin-lipped half-bow, as though to say I'm not finished. Then he followed Danzo out. Jiraiya puffed a long breath. Naruto, come on. I'll keep an eye on you. Kakashi squeezed Naruto's shoulder. Good work today. Both of you. His gaze shifted to Ino, who forced a weak smile. They all dispersed into the broken corridors, leaving Naruto's mind spinning. The third Hokage was gone. Orochimaru free. And now Danzo wanted to collar Naruto like a threat on a leash. Fury warred with dread inside him. Ino walked silently beside him, occasionally casting him troubled glances. Outside, the dawn sky lightened, but no one felt the usual promise of a new day. News spread that the Hokage's body had been recovered from the rooftop. Plans for a grand funeral began, even as medics rushed to save lives and shinobi combed the village for leftover threats. The atmosphere was solemn, hopelessness chewing at the edges of everyone's resolve. They buried the third Hokage 2 days later. High on a hill overlooking the damaged village, a simple wooden memorial stood for the Sandaime. Hundreds of Konoha citizens and shinobi gathered, dressed in dark robes, heads bowed. The air carried a hush broken only by the quiet weeping of a few villagers. Naruto stood near the back, flanked by Tenten, Hinata, and Ino. Sasuke was there, too. Still bandaged from the battle with Gaara and scowling as though every breath hurt. The funeral brought forth a wash of bitter tears, even from stoic ninjas. Naruto clenched his fists, recalling the old man's kindness. The third had let him enroll in the academy despite village gossip, allowed him a measure of freedom, and tried to protect him from secrets that might have undone his childhood. Now, everything had changed. An image flickered in Naruto's mind. Yamraj's throne of black stone. Even the Hokage's soul must pass through that realm now, he realized, a shiver crawling over his skin. The thought filled him with a hollow sense of responsibility and revulsion. When the ceremony ended, mourners drifted away. Naruto caught sight of Gaara, Temari, and Kankuro standing at a distance, wearing somber faces. Suna had retreated after the invasion, shocked by Orochimaru's betrayal of their alliance. There would be peace negotiations, but trust was shattered. Gaara and Naruto locked eyes briefly. We're both reeling from the same sense of guilt, Naruto thought. Gaara turned and left, siblings in tow. Ino touched Naruto's hand lightly. You doing okay? He shrugged, barely able to find words. Tenten offered a quiet nod of sympathy, and Hinata hovered just behind them, lips pressed into a worried line. Even as they tried to comfort him, Naruto sensed a gulf opening in his heart. How could they truly understand the darkness roiling inside him, the possibility that he might someday add to this sea of dead if he ever lost control? Over the following week, Konoha struggled to rebuild. Teams cleared debris, repaired walls, and provided relief to displaced families. Naruto threw himself into the recovery efforts, shifting broken stones, helping patch roofs, delivering supplies, anything to keep from drowning in his own thoughts. But behind the scenes, tensions brewed. He could feel it whenever he passed certain corridors or training fields. Root operatives, masked and silent, seemed to track him more than ever. Moro turned up sporadically, always at the edge of Naruto's vision, as if verifying whether Naruto had cracked or unleashed something terrifying yet. On the 10th day after the funeral, Jiraiya summoned Naruto to a half-collapsed training ground. The Toad Sage stood there, arms folded, an unusual grimness in his posture. Time's come, kid, he said flatly. Danzo and the elders want to evaluate you. If you refuse, you risk them labeling you a rogue threat. Naruto's stomach nodded. Evaluate me how? They're calling it a test of allegiance. They'll want you to demonstrate your power so they can measure the risk you pose. My guess is they'll push you until you either crack or show them a reason to back off. Jiraiya's gaze softened. I'll stand by you. So will Kakashi. But Danzo has power right now, and he's got Root behind him. You need to be prepared for anything. A flutter of fear tickled Naruto's chest. The idea of performing for Danzo and Moro, revealing the extent of his abilities, felt like walking a razor's edge. One slip, and they'd brand him a monster to be caged or controlled. Jiraiya's face hardened. There's a second option. If you want to skip town for a while, I'll help. We could claim we're going on a research trip and keep you safe while they sort things out. Naruto shook his head, memories of the village's suffering vivid in his mind. I can't run. Konoha is my home. If I leave now, it'll just prove I'm dangerous. Or that I'm guilty of something. A faint smile tugged at Jiraiya's lips. Thought you'd say that. All right. Then let's sharpen your control. We have a few days. I'll do what I can to help you master that swirling sphere jutsu. And maybe something more. But remember. Do not rely on that other power, no matter how much they provoke you. Naruto swallowed hard, nodding. Right. Those days blurred in sweat and bruises. Jiraiya pushed Naruto relentlessly, training him to refine his chakra swirl into an even more compact, devastating technique. They practiced partial summons of toads, honed evasion skills, tested illusions for crowd control. Still, the biggest test was mental. Every time Naruto fought seriously, the cold hush of Yamraj's presence stirred in his gut. He refused to yield to it, terrified of proving Danzo's worst suspicions right. In the evenings, Naruto returned to find Ino, Hinata, Tenten. Sometimes all three, checking in, bringing him snacks, or just offering quiet company. Despite the gloom of rebuilding efforts, their presence reminded him that he wasn't alone, that he had people in his corner who cared about him for more potential. When exhaustion pressed in like a vice, their small gestures, Tenten's determined pep talks, Ino's blunt reassurances, Hinata's soft empathy, kept him grounded. Finally, the day of evaluation arrived. A makeshift arena had been set up in a wide clearing behind the Hokage Tower, ringed by Anbu and Root agents. Danzo stood at one end, flanked by Moro and two masked subordinates. Homura and Kaharu watched from a raised platform, along with a handful of jonin who seemed uncomfortable but resigned to this show of power. Kakashi and Jiraiya stood on Naruto's side, tension in every line of their bodies. Naruto stepped into the ring, heart pounding like a war drum. He spied Tenten, Ino, Hinata, and Shikamaru watching from behind a security cordon, eyes filled with worry. Sasuke hovered nearby with a scowl, arms crossed, perhaps out of solidarity. He, too, knew what it was like to be viewed as a ticking time bomb. Danzo tapped his cane. Uzumaki, we will see how you respond to certain pressures. If you pass, we may trust you. Fail, and we will proceed with necessary measures. Moro stepped forward, meeting Naruto's gaze with a cool smile. I will be your opponent. Naruto's pulse kicked. He had guessed as much, but seeing the teacher's stoic face up close in a combat scenario rattled him. Those pale eyes glinted with cunning. Begin, Danzo said, turning away, disinterest or arrogance in the gesture. Moro lunged, chakra flaring, a swirling mass of shadows that formed wicked tendrils, each crackling with an eerie energy. Naruto dodged on instinct, thrown by the teacher's unusual technique. Up till now, he'd only suspected Moro was skilled, but this was on another level. Shadows lashed out, slicing the air. Naruto retaliated with a flurry of clones, each aiming to flank Moro. The teacher calmly evaded, flicking a wrist to send bolts of dark chakra that obliterated 2 clones. Another clone tried to tackle him from behind, but Moro slipped away with a speed that made Naruto's stomach drop. Come on, Moro taunted, voice low and cold. Show us the real you. Stop hiding behind child's play. Fear slithered under Naruto's skin. He forced calm, summoning the swirling sphere that Jiraiya had helped perfect. Blue chakra condensed in his palm, spinning with a high-pitched whine. He charged in, feinting left before slamming the sphere toward Moro's side. For a split second, the teacher's expression betrayed alarm. He twisted away at the last moment, and the jutsu only grazed him, enough to tear his cloak. Moro hissed, eyes flashing. He thrust a palm at Naruto's chest. A wave of inky blackness crashed into Naruto, launching him backward. Pain seared across his ribs as he tumbled through the dirt, barely stopping himself with a roll. A hush fell among the watchers, tension coiling. Jiraiya shouted, "Stay focused." Kakashi clenched a fist. Tenten covered her mouth, while Ino flinched. Hinata's Byakugan flared in anxious concentration. Spitting dust, Naruto staggered upright. Moro advanced, swirling darkness gathering around his hands. Show me that rumored ability, he insisted. The ability to kill with a thought. Prove Danzo right. Or are you too much of a coward? Naruto's breathing hitched. Yamraj's power throbbed at the base of his skull. It would be easy, terrifyingly easy, to let it slip free, to paralyze Moro's heart in a single instant. But if he did that, he'd confirm every fear Danzo had sown. Do it or be crushed, Moro threatened, unleashing a barbed tendril of shadow that slashed across Naruto's shoulder. Pain flared, blood spattering the ground. Stop pretending to be normal. Biting back a groan, Naruto forced chakra into a half-formed swirl. No lethal aura. No kill command. He lunged again. The sphere hit Moro's guard head-on, crackling in a violent stalemate. The ground beneath them cratered from the sheer force. Moro smirked, pushing back with unnatural strength, edging Naruto's jutsu away. A horrifying realization gnawed at Naruto. He's trying to break me. Moro wanted to see if the line would snap, forcing Naruto to use the Reaper's gift. Danzo's test was this. Either Naruto gave in or got humiliated, or worse, by Moro's onslaught. He clenched his teeth. I won't kill him. Moro's eyes narrowed at Naruto's stubbornness. He poured more chakra into his shadow technique, a swirling black hole that threatened to engulf Naruto's sphere. Naruto felt his arms shaking. The swirling orb flickered, on the verge of collapsing. That voice whispered again. Use me, end him, or you lose everything. Terror and fury braided in Naruto's heart. He saw Tenten, Ino, Hinata, their faces taut with worry. Remembered the villagers at the funeral, the memory of Boar's abrupt death, Gaara's near-demonic transformation. If he used the power, he'd become something monstrous in their eyes. But if he died here, a sudden rush of other memories flooded him. The academy days, the land of waves, friends forging bonds around him, the resolute stance of Konoha's defenders, the hope he saw in wounded survivors. I choose my own path. He roared, channeling every ounce of normal chakra he could muster, letting the swirl intensify into a blinding white-blue blaze. Moro's eyes widened. He clearly hadn't expected such raw will. Naruto shoved forward, shattering the teacher's dark barrier in an explosive burst of energy. Moro stumbled, trying to twist away, but the swirling sphere slammed into his torso. A thunderous boom echoed across the clearing, blasting debris. Moro flew back, flipping through the air before crashing into the dirt. Dust billowed, stinging eyes and throats. Naruto stood, panting, left arm hanging numb at his side, fresh blood staining his clothes. The swirl dissipated, leaving his palm smoking. Silence. Danzo's cane tapped on the ground. The root operatives twitched, uncertain whether to intervene. Moro lay in a small crater, coughing raggedly. No single lethal thought had ended him. Naruto had simply outfought him with sheer determination. Kakashi exhaled in relief, and Jiraiya let out a soft laugh. The crowd of onlookers seemed stunned. Tenten, Ino, and Hinata watched through parted fingers, hearts pounding in their throats. Naruto glared at Danzo. He didn't speak, his heavy breathing and bloodied form made his statement clear. I beat your test without becoming the monster you feared. Moro dragged himself upright, eyes burning with frustrated rage. For a moment, it looked like he might lunge again, but Danzo lifted a hand. Enough. Silence choked the clearing. Then Danzo said in a clipped tone, very well. It appears Uzumaki can handle himself. Without demonstrating that rumored power. He spat the last words as though they tasted foul. We will grant him clearance for continued service to Konoha, pending future observation. It was the closest thing to approval Naruto would get. He stood tall, refusing to show how close he'd come to collapsing. Moro, furious, turned his face away. Homura and Kaharu nodded, murmuring among themselves. Though their expressions weren't friendly, they seemed relieved that no unstoppable demon had just emerged. So be it, Homura said at last. We will shift our focus to the new Hokage selection. Uzumaki, your role remains the same. Serve the village, abide by its laws. Danzo glared at Naruto once more, then spun on his heel. Root operatives fell in behind him, while Moro, bandaged and limping, followed, eyes glittering with a mixture of hatred and curiosity. Jiraiya and Kakashi darted forward to check Naruto, who finally let himself sag in exhaustion. He clutched his wounded shoulder, relief and pain mixing in a dizzy swirl. From the sidelines, Tenten and Ino rushed past the rope barriers, Hinata not far behind. Tenten grabbed his uninjured arm to steady him, breath shaky. Ino swiftly pulled out medical salve, pressing it to the slash across his shoulder. Hinata's Byakugan scanned for deeper wounds, her cheeks flushed with OT. Ino scolded, though tears threatened in her eyes. Tenten simply let out a shaky laugh. Hinata murmured soft encouragement, urging him to breathe steadily. Naruto stared at them, throat tight with gratitude. He'd passed Danzo's twisted evaluation without succumbing to the Reaper. Maybe that was enough for today. Even so, a deeper tremor of dread lingered in his core. If Moro had tested him, was the next trial from Yamraj himself? Or Orochimaru? The conflict felt far from over. That night, Naruto found himself at the edge of the village, perched on the collapsed remains of a small courtyard. The sky glistened with stars. Tenten, Ino, and Hinata had banded together to fuss over his injuries, eventually letting him be after ensuring he got some rest. But sleep refused to come. He looked at the battered rooftops, saw flickers of lanterns in windows, a testament to Konoha's resilience. His father, the god of death, had no stake in this place except to claim its souls eventually. But Naruto had grown here, loved here, forged friendships and loyalties. He wouldn't let Yamraj's domain define him. A quiet shuffle made him turn. Tenten stepped out from behind a half-crumbled wall, carrying 2 small mugs of tea. She offered one without a word, then settled beside him on a broken ledge. They sipped in silence, the warm drink soothing strained nerves. After a while, she asked softly, "Are you really okay?" Naruto hesitated, thinking about the dreamlike corridor of the underworld, the robed messengers. He couldn't bring himself to unload all of that. "I'm here," he answered, voice rough. Her eyes lingered on his bandaged shoulder. I saw you hold back against Moro, even when he pushed you to the brink. That's not easy. A faint, weary laugh escaped him. I can't keep relying on lethal shortcuts, right? She studied him for a moment, then nodded. You can rely on us, though. We might not be gods of death, but we have your back. The words sank in, a quiet vow shared among the flicker of starlight. He set down his empty mug and glanced at her, meeting a steady gaze that softened the dread in his chest. Despite the chaos, despite Danzo's watchful eye, he wasn't alone in this fight. And maybe that counted for more than any power he did or didn't have. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Orochimaru at large, a new Hokage to be chosen, and the lingering specter of Yamraj's domain. But for now, Naruto let the hush of the night and Tenten's calm presence soothe the weariness in his bones. Somewhere in the distance, he imagined the underworld receding, the robed figures watching with silent curiosity. I'll choose my own destiny, Naruto vowed inwardly, gaze drifting over the quiet village skyline, no matter what. Smoke curled from the brazier in the council chamber, casting dancing shadows against the walls. The next Hokage had just been decided. Tsunade of the Sannin would assume the mantle, once she could be found and convinced. For now, Konoha wobbled under a provisional leadership. The village elders, Danzo included, exercising authority in the interim. Tension rippled through the ninja ranks, many unsure whether to hope or fear for the new era. Naruto stood in the corridor outside the chamber, battered shoulders still bandaged from his clash with Moro days ago. Despite winning his evaluation, the sense of being watched hadn't faded. Root operatives sometimes trailed him through the village, likely on Danzo's orders. Yet he remained free as one could be while shadows skulked at every turn. He felt a gentle pressure on his sleeve. Hinata, eyes soft with concern, handed him a folded slip of paper. F for you, she said quietly, cheeks flushing pink. Naruto opened it, scanning the tidy handwriting. A single line read, "Please meet me in Jiraiya at the old courtyard near midnight, Kakashi." He blinked, tucking the note into his pocket. Hinata waited, fidgeting with her fingers. Though she didn't ask for details, her worried expression said enough. She was aware something big was happening behind Konoha's official front. Some brewing confrontation neither of them could name. Thanks, Naruto murmured. She bobbed her head, relieved he didn't brush her off. Before he could say more, a Chunin called her away to help with post-invasion repairs. She gave him a shy parting wave, leaving Naruto alone in the hallway with the note burning against his palm. He slipped out of his apartment well after dark, footsteps light across the silent rooftops. Konoha's wounds still showed. Cracks in walls, piles of rubble awaiting removal. But at least the fires were gone, the immediate danger over. All that remained were watchers in the shadows and an uncertain future. Moonlight fell on the old courtyard behind the Hokage monument. Broken statues, scorched grass, and half-toppled trees made it look more like a ruin. Kakashi and Jiraiya stood near a withered fountain. They turned at his approach, exchanging glances that spoke of urgency. Kakashi stepped forward. "Naruto, thanks for coming." Jiraiya folded his arms, mouth set in a grim line. "We've got news. Not just about Tsunade, but about you." Naruto's chest tightened. "Spit it out already." A sigh escaped Kakashi's mask. "Danzo and the elders are allowing you to remain in Konoha, but they're drawing up contingencies. If Orochimaru, or that teacher Moro, or any other threat uses your lineage against us, the council wants a protocol in place. They might even try to relocate you if they think you're unstable." Jiraiya's gaze flicked to Naruto's bandaged shoulder. "We can't let them do that. You've proven yourself. But Danzo's not the sort to give up easily. He'll push at the slightest sign of weakness. Until Tsunade arrives and takes proper leadership, you'll be on thin ice." The chill in Naruto's veins intensified. "Is that why you asked me here?" Kakashi nodded. "We think someone else is moving in the shadows. Moro's not just a random teacher. We've dug into records. He's had ties to Root for years, running covert missions. He may even have direct connections to Orochimaru. Or he could be fueling his own agenda." Jiraiya gave a dry laugh. "A lot of guesswork, but we suspect he wants to exploit your powers. Turn you into a weapon, or force you into a corner where you unleash them. Either outcome suits someone hungry for chaos." Naruto's hand curled into a fist. "So what do we do? Stand by until Tsunade shows up?" Not exactly, Kakashi replied. We suspect Moro's planning something tonight. One of my Ninkins sniffed him out meeting with a small band of masked shinobi on the outskirts. They might have gone to a shrine outside the village walls. We'd like to see what he's up to, and stop him if necessary. Jiraiya laid a heavy hand on Naruto's head, ruffling his hair with surprising gentleness. You in? This could be dangerous, kid. Dangerous didn't begin to describe it. But Naruto squared his shoulders and, hailing the crisp night air, lead the way. They slipped past watchtowers and scaled the outer wall. Kakashi's Ninkin, Pakun, guided them along a moonlit path, paw prints silent on damp leaves. A few route patrols roamed the perimeter, but the three of them avoided detection through stealth and a liberal sprinkling of Jiraiya's minor genjutsu. An hour out, they found a half-collapsed shrine hidden in thick undergrowth. Cracked statues of grimacing deities lined the courtyard, vines coiling around their limbs. Torchlight flickered inside, revealing dark shapes moving. Even from a distance, Naruto sensed an ominous pull, a faint echo of the underworld he experienced in dreams. They crept closer, hearts pounding. Kakashi and Jiraiya wordlessly signaled for Naruto to stand by. They would circle around. He nodded, crouched behind a mossy pillar, scanning for signs of Moro's presence. Sure enough, voices echoed from within. Our master grows impatient, someone hissed. If Naruto Uzumaki will return on his own, we must force his hand. A second voice. He is the key. If we gain the god of death's favor through him, Konoha will fall to its knees. Naruto's blood chilled. They want my father's power. Why? He thought back to Orochimaru. Obsessed with forbidden jutsu. Could Moro be aligned with him, or was this something else entirely? Kakashi's silent form appeared on the shrine's far flank. Jiraiya on the opposite side. In sync, they converged, moving to intercept. Naruto followed suit, slipping through the crumbling entrance. The interior stank of incense and decay. Three masked shinobi in root-style uniforms circled a stone altar, performing a ritual with swirling black candles. At the center stood Moro, cloak swaying in an unseen breeze. His injuries from the evaluation hadn't fully healed. Bandages peeked from his sleeves, yet he radiated cold menace. Kakashi stepped forward, lightning dancing on his hand. This ends now. Jiraiya added, voice low, stop these twisted games, Moro. Moro's lips twitched, eyes gleaming in the dancing torchlight. Ah, I was wondering when you'd come. He gestured, and the three masked shinobi attacked, unleashing a barrage of jutsu. Kakashi moved in a blur, countering with shuriken and a crackling rakery. Jiraiya conjured a toad's tongue to ensnare one adversary. Smoke filled the shrine as stone pillars shattered, debris rattling the ancient walls. Naruto skidded to avoid a stray windblade, heart thumping. Moro advanced on him, a swirl of darkness coalescing around his hands, similar to the jutsu he used before. We never finished our match, he hissed. This time, no one will stop me from dragging out your true self. What's with this shrine? Naruto demanded, bracing for battle. Moro spat a dry laugh. The boundary between realms is thin here. Your father's realm, the underworld, touches ours. If I spill enough blood, perhaps I can tear a hole wide enough for the god of death to grant me ultimate power. Or maybe you'll do it for me. Revulsion coiled in Naruto's stomach. You're insane. Moro lunged, shadowed chakra flaring. Naruto rushed to meet him, forming the swirl of blue energy in his hand. They clashed in a searing explosion, cracks splintering across the shrine floor. Moro snarled, pressing his advantage with brute force. The swirl in Naruto's hand flickered, nearly collapsing. You feel it, don't you? Moro goaded. That whisper in your blood, it's not satisfied with half measures. He drove an elbow into Naruto's ribs, forcing him back. Coughing, Naruto forced distance between them. In the corner of his eye, Kakashi and Jiraiya subdued two of the masked shinobi. The third launched a violent chain of water bullets, but Jiraiya's toad summon swallowed them in a single gulp. The clash rattled the shrine, dust cascading from the ceiling. Moro pivoted, weaving a quick seal. The stone altar lit with crackling black energy. A moan of wind coursed through the shrine, stirring the flames of the eerie candles. Naruto felt a sickening shift, like a door opening somewhere just behind his eyelids. A wave of spiritual pressure flooded in, oppressive and cold. He recognized it. The realm of the dead, the same presence he felt in nightmares, the same domain Yamraj ruled. Invisible hands seemed to brush the edges of reality, pulling it thin. Shadows elongated, merging into horrifying shapes that flickered like ghosts. "Behold," Moro whispered, eyes wild. "I'll drag your father's essence into this plane. Then not even the Hokage could stand against me." Pain stabbed Naruto's skull. He gasped, seeing double. One vision of the ruined shrine, and another of an obsidian corridor lined with wailing spirits. He staggered, the swirl of his jutsu sputtering out. A cold voice reverberated in the space behind his ears. Yamraja's voice, though no words formed. Kakashi, mid-battle, cried out, "Naruto, hold on." But Moro's ritual fed on the boundary's breach. Darkness coiled around the teacher's body, warping his aura until he resembled a skeletal specter. He launched black tendrils that lashed the air, trying to snare Naruto. Naruto planted his feet, trembling at the suffocating wave of spiritual energy. If Yamraj truly broke through, or if Moro seized that power, the village might face a threat even worse than Orochimaru. Kakashi and Jiraiya tore free from the last masked shinobi. Jiraiya spat a toad oil bomb at Moro, while Kakashi flicked a kunai aimed for the man's throat. But a swirl of blackness shielded Moro, hurling both attacks away. The shrine floor cracked, stone columns toppled, and part of the ceiling collapsed. Debris rained down in thunderous crashes. Naruto's mind spun. He had to do something. This was more than just a jutsu duel. Moro was attempting to breach the barrier between life and death. Naruto's father, the god of death, might take advantage of it, or Yamraja's domain might flood out uncontrollably. No more running from it. Drawing a shaky breath, Naruto closed his eyes. He reached within himself, carefully, to that dark presence he'd resisted again and again. It answered with a hungry stir, colder than ice. "You want me, old man? Fine. But we do this on my terms." Opening his eyes, he molded his chakra around that black swirl. Blue arcs crackled over his body, but at the center of his chest, a faint coil of inky darkness shimmered. He shaped it, forced it into a coherent form rather than letting it rampage. Slowly, a deadly hush pressed on the shrine. Moro's eyes went round. "Yes," he breathed, twisted triumph on his face. "Show me." Naruto exhaled, stepping forward. "You're no prophet. You're just a madman who can't see the line between life and death. That line is mine to guard, not yours to shatter." He raised his palm. Swirls of energy converged, blue chakras swirling with a narrow thread of black at its core. Not enough to kill with a thought, but enough to harness a fraction of that dreaded power. A fierce wind battered the shrine, blowing out the black candles. Moro lunged, black tendrils crackling in a final attempt to break Naruto's guard. Naruto thrust the swirling energy forward. In that moment, he felt Yamraja's presence intensify. The god's towering silhouette looming behind him in the half-real corridor of souls. Instead of ceding control, Naruto poured his own will into the jutsu. The swirl collided with Moro, and an ear-splitting detonation of spiritual force rocked the shrine. With a tormented wail, Moro's shadowy aura shattered, tendrils snapping like dried twigs. The teacher's body slammed against the altar, blood spraying from his mouth. Stone tremors rippled out, the edges of that eerie portal flickering. The barrier between worlds began to close. Jiraiya and Kakashi shielded their faces from the blast of raw energy. Chunks of the ceiling caved in, forcing them to dodge. Dust choked the air. Naruto coughed violently, knees buckling from the strain. He glimpsed Moro, crumpled and unmoving, no swirl of darkness left in him. The malicious presence in the shrine dissipated. With it, the harrowing echo of Yamraja's domain receded. A fleeting whisper brushed Naruto's mind. Like a heavy sigh of resignation, then silence. He dropped forward, catching himself on trembling arms. Kakashi rushed over, kneeling by him, while Jiraiya stomped the last flickering embers of black flame with a toad summons help. The shrine, battered and half-collapsed, now lay quiet under pale moonlight. Naruto felt his vision blur. He forced a grin, ignoring the throb in his chest. "Guess, that settles it." Kakashi exhaled, relief washing through him. "Yeah, kid, you did it." Moro lay sprawled near the broken altar, breathing shallowly, a faint rattle in his throat. Kakashi eased closer, checking him. The man opened one eye, dim with hatred. "You fool, we could have commanded death, changed the world." Naruto shook his head. "Not like that." A bitter laugh rattled from Moro's lips. "Et you rest, the cycle of death never ends." Then his gaze went blank. No final jutsu, no triumphant last stand, just emptiness. Naruto turned away, swallowing a wave of conflicting emotions. He'd used a sliver of Yamraj's power to stop Moro's plan, but at least he'd kept it contained. Part of him feared how easy it had felt. One misstep, and he might have ended up like Moro, consumed by that hunger. Kakashi stood, glancing at Jiraiya. "We need to report this. Danzo will demand details." Jiraiya grunted. "He can have them." This time, his pawn failed. "And the shrine's in ruins. No more messing with the barrier." He placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "But you all right, kid?" Naruto managed a nod. "I will be." They slipped back into Konoha just before dawn, weary and coated in dust. Anbu at the gates recognized Kakashi and Jiraiya, parted to let them pass without question. Word traveled fast. Moro was gone, presumably killed in the line of duty. Officially, it might be framed as a traitor fiasco. Danzo, for his part, said nothing publicly, though Naruto sensed new watchers in the corners of every street. The days that followed were tense but gradually settled. Tsunade was located, coaxed, or bullied, by Jiraiya into returning to the village. She arrived with mixed reluctance and compassion, quickly stepping into her role as fifth Hokage. Naruto's sense of relief was immense. Tsunade carried an authority that even Danzo couldn't easily undermine. With Tsunade in charge, the hush around Naruto's heritage softened. Danzo still cast occasional dark looks his way, but the direct threat of being harnessed or caged diminished. Root operatives continued their watch, but Tsunade's firm stance kept them from overstepping. In the midst of rebuilding, Naruto found himself busier than ever. He helped reinforce the walls, trained alongside Sasuke and Sakura when time allowed, and did missions that supported the village's fragile return to normal. Hinata, Tenten, and Ino hovered at the edges of his life, each forging a growing bond with him that felt equal parts comforting and complicated. Naruto sensed an undercurrent of warmth from them, an acceptance that eased the loneliness he'd carried for so long. Sometimes, late at night, he'd stand on the rooftops, scanning the sky. The hush of the underworld still tugged at the corners of his mind. He'd dream of Yamraj's throne, or robed specters drifting through black corridors. But now, those dreams ended with Naruto forcing them back, refusing to be a passive heir. One evening, he arrived at a small training field to find Tenten, Ino, and Hinata waiting, each wearing determined expressions. Their eyes darted among each other, as if they'd coordinated. "What's this?" Naruto asked, arching a brow. Tenten stepped forward first, crossing her arms. "We've had enough of you sneaking around, avoiding us whenever you get spooked by your nightmares, or by Danzo's men. We're your friends, aren't we?" Ino flipped her ponytail. "We can handle the scary stuff too, you know." Hinata managed a firm nod. We want to train with you, not just physically, but so you don't have to face everything alone." Something hot prickled behind Naruto's eyes. He swallowed, remembering how he once believed no one could possibly understand. Yet here they stood, offering to share the burden. Words failed him for a moment, so he just nodded, a shaky grin tugging at his mouth. "Thank you." They spent the next hour sparring gently, exchanging jutsu tips, and occasionally teasing Naruto for letting his mind wander. The tension in his chest eased, replaced by quiet camaraderie. When they finished, the four of them collapsed on the grass, panting in the dying sunlight. In a burst of courage, Naruto told them a bit more about his nightmares, the sense of looming darkness, the silent watchers. Not everything, but enough to let them glimpse the weight he carried. Ino placed a hand over his. Tenten offered a confident smile, and Hinata's eyes shone with empathy. A breeze rustled the tree branches overhead, shadows stretching across the training field. For the first time, Naruto felt that maybe he could carry the God of Death's legacy without succumbing to it. The morning after, Tsunade summoned Naruto to the Hokage's office. He found her seated behind the wide desk, rummaging through a stack of scrolls. Kakashi hovered at her side. Tsunade lifted a brow when she saw Naruto. There you are, brat. I've been hearing stories about you. Defying Danzo, facing Orochimaru's invasion, your father's interesting heritage. Naruto braced, half expecting lectures or condemnation. Instead, Tsunade sighed, leaning back in her chair. Here's how it is. Konoha needs every loyal shinobi it can get, especially one as stubbornly determined as you. But I'm not blind to the risks. Jiraiya gave me the rundown of your special circumstances. He swallowed. And Tsunade's eyes flicked with a hint of warmth. And I know what it's like to carry heavy ghosts. The village is prepared to stand by you, as long as you keep standing by us. Relief flooded him, so overwhelming that he nearly buckled. He bowed stiffly. Yes, ma'am. A rare smile curved Tsunade's lips. Don't make me regret it. Kakashi clapped Naruto's shoulder, pride hidden behind that casual mask. Then Tsunade handed Naruto a small scroll. Your official rank, Chunin. I figure you earned it the hard way, even if the exams never concluded properly. Naruto's eyes widened in disbelief. Really? Tsunade waved a hand. Don't get cocky. You still have a long way to go. But it's time you got recognized for what you've done, instead of what you might do. Now go, before I find something else for you to do, like more paperwork. Heart-soaring, Naruto left the office, barely suppressing a grin. He found Tenten, Ino, and Hinata waiting in the hall, curious about his summons. When he flashed the Chunin scroll, their excited congratulations blended into a tangle of laughter and relief. In that moment, Naruto felt the weight of his father's domain lift a fraction. He was part of this village, not just a harbinger of doom. If people like Tsunade, Jiraiya, and even Kakashi believed in him, maybe someday everyone else would too. Night fell, and the fires that once ravaged Konoha were long since doused. Reconstruction was well underway, new beams and fresh mortar rising where old walls had crumbled. The final traces of Orochimaru's invasion lingered only in scars and fresh headstones, a reminder that peace could be fragile. Yet Konoha endured. Naruto found himself on a familiar rooftop overlooking the village, the faint glow of lanterns winking below. Footsteps scuffed behind him. Soft, careful. He glanced over his shoulder. Tenten approached with a playful smile, Ino just behind her, arms crossed. Hinata hung back slightly, hands clasped. They joined him, forming a small circle. The hush of nighttime draped the four of them in gentle calm. Once, Naruto might have run from this closeness, afraid of letting people in. But now, he took comfort in their presence. Look, Tenten pointed at the skyline, where the ruined sections of the village rose in new scaffolding. We'll build it back stronger. Ino nodded, ponytail shifting in the evening breeze. And we'll keep training. No telling when the next threat arrives. Hinata exhaled quietly, but as long as we stand together, we'll be okay. Naruto let the moment sink in. A swirl of gratitude and warmth filled his chest. He glanced up at the star-scattered sky. Sometimes, he imagined Yamraj's eyes gleaming in the void. His father, watching from that grim realm. Instead of dread, Naruto now felt a spark of defiance. This is my home, my family. I won't let you take it from me. In that instant, a faint whisper crossed the boundary between worlds. Not malevolent or demanding, just a distant echo that might have been acceptance. Yamraj acknowledging his son's choice without trying to sway him further. Naruto inhaled, letting the rooftop's wind toss his hair. The specter of a dark destiny still lurked at the edges of his life, but tonight, it felt less like a looming threat and more like a silent companion. One he would learn to guide, rather than be guided by. He looked at the three kunoichi around him. Tenten's determined grin, Ino's bold posture, Hinata's quiet strength. Each had stood by him, kept him tethered to the light when shadows threatened. He didn't know exactly how to navigate these multiple bonds of affection. He only knew that each meant the world to him in different ways, and that the future felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Thank you, he whispered, so soft that only the night heard it. Yet Tenten, Ino, and Hinata all turned, as if sensing the weight of his words. Their eyes shone with mutual understanding. In the distance, the Hokage monument watched over the sleeping village, a testament to the will of fire that burned in its people. Somewhere beneath mortal sight, robed figures withdrew, leaving Naruto to his own destiny. Whatever lay ahead, the threat of Orochimaru's vengeance, the secrets of the underworld, Danzo's lurking schemes. Naruto would meet it head-on, carrying the legacy of death itself not as a curse, but as a guardian's burden. He stood there in the hush, joined by friends who'd become something deeper, gazing over the village they all swore to protect. And if the faint shimmer in the night sky was any indication, Yamraj gazed back, waiting to see how his son would shape fate in the days still to come. To be continued.